Chapter 122, Autumn Riding Contest. The next day the weather finally cleared. Otani and Kentaro returned to the farm to continue their training. Both of them felt awkward at first. The bull saddle was uncomfortable, and after a full day in the saddle, their inner thighs were chafed and sore. Fortunately, there was a special salve on hand that helped them recover quickly. Otani refused to give up and kept training. Dew and Sirona pulled up stools and sat at the edge of the arena, watching Otani's clumsy attempts with keen interest. After a while, Dew couldn't stand it any longer and began offering pointers. He'd grown up in a large family and had been riding since he was a child, so he knew the ropes. Even though Otani was practicing on a bull, the basic principles were the same. With Dew's corrections, Otani improved fast. Before long, his riding looked competent. Dew couldn't help but sigh at how quickly Otani picked things up. Still, Dew knew the limits of experience. Without the system and any riding-related advantages Otani might have, learning like that would normally take months. Time passed quickly. On the morning of the competition, Otani put on a carefully chosen denim suit and spent an extra minute checking his reflection. When he was satisfied, he swung onto Kentaro and rode out to the venue just beyond town. By the time he arrived, the grounds were already crowded. Otani dismounted and led Kentaro to the sign-in table. After registering, they waited among the other contestants and spectators. The event was billed as friendly entertainment, friendship first, competition second, but everyone knew some of the riders still wanted to win. As the race time approached, riders climbed back onto their mounts and gathered at the starting line. Otani's attention was caught by a striking sight. Someone had arrived on a motor lizard, a Pokémon said to exist only in the Padia region. It was gorgeous, sleek, and proud, and Otani found himself staring with a sudden, foolish envy. He looked at the motor lizard more than once and was caught doing so by its owner. She was a beautiful girl who met his gaze and smiled brightly. Flushed and a little embarrassed, Otani returned the smile, then forced himself to get serious. The race was about to begin. When the signal gun cracked, Motor Lizard surged forward, punched through the encirclement, and sprinted to the head of the line. Otani hadn't allowed Kentaro to charge right away. He had him stay tucked in with the main group to conserve his strength. Apparently, others were thinking the same. The number of riders in the lead pack kept swelling. Otani felt uneasy. The more people there were up front, the harder it would be to break out without getting blocked. He started signaling Kentaro to inch forward inside the group, increasing speed little by little and keeping it subtle. Then, at a bend in the road, Kentaro suddenly put the throttle down and slipped free in an instant, becoming the second rider to break away. He closed rapidly on Motor Lizard. Otani and the girl fell into a quiet, practiced rhythm, taking turns to shield each other from the wind. They pushed harder and left the main force behind. A number of riders in the pack, unable to hold back any longer, burst out in pursuit of Kentaro and Motor Lizard. They had tried to break away on their own, but without any coordinated effort they quickly ran out of steam and were soon swallowed up by the large group chasing from behind. The peloton moved with disciplined rotations. This was a 300-kilometer race, and if riders and Pokémon didn't share the workload, no one would make it to the end. Up front, Otani and the girl took turns cutting the wind. Kentaro and his motor lizard were visibly flagging. Otani glanced back at the pack, which was still some distance away, then signaled Kentaro to ease the pace. The motorcycle lizard fell back and slowed as instructed. Sharing the lead let both Pokémon recover a bit of breath and strength. Only then did Otani have a chance to speak to the girl. "Hi, I'm Otani. Hello, I'm Duoli," he replied. "We're competitors, but I hope we can cooperate until the finish." "Of course," Otani said. "You can't do this alone." They fell quiet after that, each focusing on the road ahead. And it wasn't only the Pokémon who were pushed to their limits. The trainers were exhausted too, every bit as much as their partners. Hundreds of kilometers of jarring travel was a brutal test of the trainers' endurance. The competition rules were strict. Trainers and Pokémon could only eat supplies provided by the organizers, and every competitor, human and Pokémon alike, had to carry a recorder to log their performance for the entire course. Any sign of cheating meant immediate disqualification and a lifetime ban. Otani and Dolly kept up a steady cooperation and pushed on. The trailing main group had badly miscalculated. They hadn't expected Otani and Dolly to hang on as long as they did. With the race already at its midpoint, the 5 leaders in that group realized that if they didn't break away now, they wouldn't have the energy to catch up later. They exchanged quick looks and, wordlessly, accelerated. In an instant, they peeled off from the main body, formed a tight pursuit team, and surged into the wind after Otani and the others. The sudden departure left the rest of the group leaderless and scrambling. By the time anyone reacted and tried to give chase, it was already too late. The massive formation fragmented in an instant. Riders searched for familiar faces, snapped into small squads, and began racing on their own. Those who had been riding comfortably in the middle started to flag. Fatigue took them down the field. A few teams coalesced and surged toward the second group of 5, trying to drag them back, or, if that failed, to latch onto them and shadow their move. Otani realized a pack was closing in from behind. He was already running on empty and was quickly swallowed by the swarm, pushed into the middle and surrounded. He and Dory exchanged a quick look and chose the same plan. Take the wind, conserve what they had, and ride the draft for a while. 2/3 of the distance went by like that. With 100 kilometers to go, the front group suddenly kicked up the pace, and the line stretched out long and thin. Otani saw an opening. He flicked his eyes toward Dory. The signal was all they needed. Together they worked in concert, splitting the squeeze and forcing their way out of the encirclement. They thought they were clear, until the old man leading the charge, mounted on a horse that seemed to glow like it was wrapped in flame, hauled himself up alongside them and burst out with the brake. In the end, the lead group grew from 2 to 3. They took turns breaking the wind, but when it came time for the old man to take his pull, he pretended not to notice. Otani and Duoli exchanged helpless looks. They couldn't afford to slow down, and they couldn't shake him off, so they had to swallow the loss and keep going. Otani didn't give up entirely. Whenever the two of them rotated to the front, he made a point of avoiding the old man, denying him the shelter of the slipstream. The old man bristled, but couldn't do anything about it. He shifted the flame horse, slipped back behind Otani and Duoli, and tucked in with them. Even such a small maneuver burned up precious energy. With 50 kilometers to go, Kentaro and his team were already running on fumes. They'd made it that far on sheer will. Knowing this, the old man stopped making a scene and simply took his turn at the front when required, gritting his teeth into the headwind. If Otani and Duoli had left him, he'd almost certainly have been swallowed by the chasing group behind and never seen again. In the last 10 kilometers, Duoli emptied himself and launched into a sprint, trying to drop Otani and the old man once and for all. Otani and the old man reacted immediately and surged after him. They traded the lead back and forth. The finish line loomed ahead, but the pack behind them was gaining fast. With 2 kilometers to go, Otani began to flag, his concentration slipping. Suddenly Kentaro shouted, and the cry snapped Otani back to attention. Otani leaned over and hissed in Kentaro's ear, "Go for it, Kentaro. Leave no regrets." Kentaro's eyes were rimmed red, and he was gasping for breath, but Otani's words lit a fire under him. He dug in, forcing every last ounce of strength out of his legs. Kentaro surged forward, and the riders known as Motor Lizard and Flame Horse answered in kind. The 3 of them ran neck and neck, separated by nothing more than inches. As the finish drew nearer, they pushed even harder, speed replacing fatigue. Then, over the line. Otani threw his arms up and shouted, wild with relief. Kentaro roared to the sky. The lowing of cows rolled across the finish as others in the field came through. When the adrenaline faded, Otani slid weakly down from his cow. Staff were there in an instant, catching him and handing him fluids and energy. Kentaro, too, was quickly surrounded by medical personnel and given the best care. Once everyone had rested, the award ceremony began. Otani and Kentaro stood on the top podium, eyes bright with excitement, and waved to the crowd. The spectators responded with warm, respectful applause. The ceremony was brief. When it was over, Otani cradled the bronze trophy, a surge of pride swelling in his chest. He resolved to put it in the most prominent place when he got home. The man and the cow slowly made their way back to the farm. As soon as Otani reached his bed, he was too exhausted to do anything else and fell asleep immediately. Kentaro went back to his own quarters early and slept as well. The housekeeper's sister looked on helplessly and called her brother in to help Otani change and wash up. He then tucked Otani in with a quilt. Dew and Sirona picked up the trophy, handling it with curious hands. Otani did amazingly well, Dew said in awe. A professional riding race over 300 kilometers, he won the whole thing on his very first try. That's real talent. To everyone else, Otani looked like a natural genius, someone who could pick up anything quickly and master it. What they didn't know was that he owed much of that ability to a set of hidden systems. As he slept, he dreamed again of himself lifting the championship trophy, and he couldn't deny how thrilling that vision felt. Chapter 123, First Milking. It had been almost half a month since the big milk cans arrived at the farm. According to the manual Mr. Fumin had given him, the time to start milking was fast approaching. Otani was excited to try, so early that morning he changed into his work clothes, grabbed his tools, and walked toward the big milk can barn. This was Otani's first time milking a cow, and it might be his last. The professional milking equipment he'd ordered was on the way. Once it arrived, the automated tanks would do the job. All he'd have to do then was route the milk through pipes to the transport truck. Inside the barn, the big milk cans sat in an orderly row, calmly waiting for Dagu to come and milk them. Otani hesitated for a moment, speaking softly to the nearest one. "Big milk can, if I hurt you, please tell me." "Meow meow." The big milk can answered gently. They weren't tall, only about 1.2 meters, and for the most part, they weren't aggressive. There were a few exceptions, of course. Even in the anime, there had been a terribly naughty Togepi. Still, most of them were docile. Otani set the bucket down in front of the animal and, careful not to startle it, reached out and pressed gently with his hands. Otani worked steadily, using his index, middle, and ring fingers and then his thumb in sequence to squeeze the udder. Thick, milky white milk flowed into the bucket. Miltank looked perfectly content, eyes half closed. When the pail was full, Otani switched it for an empty one and kept going. At first, he was fascinated by the process, but after a while it wore him out. He made a mental note to ask the supplier for a special milking machine suited to a Miltank's large udders. This manual method was too tiring. He wiped the sweat from his brow and kept at it. By mid-morning, they'd only managed a few dozen of the 500 large milk cans they needed to fill, and Otani realized he couldn't do it alone. When Dew and Sirona heard they were needed, they came to help. Their technique was clumsy at first, though, and Miltank retaliated by spraying them with milk. Otani showed them patiently, step by step, how to hold and squeeze. Once they learned the rhythm, the process went much more smoothly. The real heavy lifting remained with the siblings, Otani and Aikanchi. They handled most of the milking while the other Pokémon carried the filled cans. By the time the work was finished, the sky was already dark. The milk was loaded onto the cart and taken away, and everyone sat down to a simple dinner. After the long day, Otani went straight to bed. The next morning, the equipment Otani had rushed to order arrived. He opened the farm gate for the truck and, with the help of his Pokémon, had several huge storage tanks unloaded and set in place in no time. The delivery technician explained how everything worked. There were two parts to the system, a portable milking unit and a large stationary storage system. The portable unit was designed to strap around a Miltank's midsection. It looked like a small barrel, transparent like glass, but reinforced and very sturdy. Otani fitted one on his big Miltank to try it out. The Miltank seemed perfectly comfortable. She simply sat down to graze while the milking unit quietly filled. When the barrel was full, Otani unlatched it, and the milk was immediately pumped through hoses into the large tanks, where it settled into dedicated grooves. The whole setup had refrigeration and freshness controls, and it was plumbed straight to Otani's house. He could draw fresh milk directly from a tap. He'd heard a rumor about a milk pipeline running up north. Whether that was true or not, this system made things easy. From then on, all he had to do was collect the milk periodically, a very convenient arrangement. The large centralized milking rig wasn't as comfortable for the cows as hand milking, but it was far more efficient, and the cows seemed to tolerate it well enough. Otani watched the line of mill tanks as they took turns at the machine. Each one only needed a few minutes, and the whole RD was done in an hour or two. When they were finished, the mill tanks wandered off happily to graze and roll in the long grass. Otani walked over to check the storage tanks. Each silo held 2,000 liters, and 5 of them were already full. He'd bought 10 tanks in total, so at the current production rate, he'd have to arrange for someone to pick up the milk every couple of days. Once the dairy barn was fully set up, though, it wouldn't be so much trouble. He'd only need to do a quick check once a day. One thing he hadn't expected was Snorlax drinking milk the way others drink water. Still, compared to the output of the mill tanks, even Snorlax's prodigious appetite was negligible. He couldn't possibly drink enough to make a dent, even if he drank himself sick. Otani found himself wondering if Snorlax had grown. He seemed larger than before, almost 2.5 meters tall. Snorlax looked up with a simple, contented smile and then hugged Otani, eyes full of adoration. To Snorlax, Otani was nothing less than an angel. Otani kept giving Snorlax all the good food he could eat, and now unlimited milk on top of that. He checked the big Pokémon regularly and was relieved to find him healthy and growing normally. There was nothing to worry about. If Snorlax wanted to eat, he should be allowed. Otani also made a point of visiting the queen bee and chatting with her. She'd complained that life inside the hive was boring, so Otani furnished her place. A comfortable sofa, a TV, a refrigerator, little comforts she'd never had before. That did the trick. She finally seemed content. When Dagu patted down a little later, he found the queen bee glued to a romance drama on TV. Otani sat with her for a while, but the show bored him, so he left. The queen bee waved him off without looking away from the screen. Otani just smiled helplessly and went about his business. Sirona slipped away in the afternoon, probably out of guilt. It didn't look good for a champion to be slacking like that. Otani, however, hadn't used up his saved annual leave, so he stayed on the farm a little longer. After he made a chess friend, he and his homebody brother Du began to play often. Du usually finished his chores first, then sat down to play, which suited Otani just fine. A tall, striking figure stood outside the farm gate, cradling a baby in his arms. He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether to come in, then turned away without entering. Ibrahimovic stirred, as if sensing the presence. He opened one eye, glanced toward the gate, then closed it again, and settled back to enjoy Otani's massage. After the trouble with the queen bee, Otani had noticed how bored many of the Pokémon on the farm were. They worked every day with nothing to break the monotony. As he kneaded Ibrahimovic's shoulders, Otani tried to think of ways to fix that. "Evie," he asked, "what do you think about building somewhere on the farm for Pokémon to relax?" Ibrahimovic, still half asleep, blinked in confusion. Otani explained his idea, and Ibrahimovic considered it before offering a few suggestions: a little cinema that showed films featuring Pokémon, and a bar where they could drink and unwind. Otani liked the bar idea. He pulled out his phone and called Carter right away to ask if he could help build one on the farm. Carter was a little surprised to get the call, but he shrugged it off, assumed it was just another wealthy eccentric with money to burn. Still, the deal was made. The next day, Carter and his crew set to work helping Otani build the tavern. The space was small, tucked right beside Otani's house. When Otani stepped inside, the doorbell gave a crisp little ring. He looked around, clearly pleased, and without hesitation transferred the payment to Carter. Carter grinned when the money hit his account, but his curiosity got the better of him, and he asked what the place was for. Otani explained his idea succinctly. It would be an entertainment venue for Pokémon. Carter blinked, then laughed in genuine admiration. "Nobody's ever thought to make a place like this for Pokémon," he said. "You're the first, Otani." After a short conversation, Carter and his men left. Otani arranged for a shipment of drinks to be delivered to the farm. After all, the tavern wouldn't be truly finished until the bottles arrived. He decided to open at 5 in the afternoon and planned to stand behind the bar himself, mixing cocktails for any Pokémon that came by. Payment, he decided, would be whatever they had on them, money if they had it, but stones or leaves would do just fine. As long as the payment goes through, none of this matters. Chapter 124, The Pokémon's Requests. The bar had just opened when Queen Bee arrived. First customer, eyes bright with curiosity as she surveyed the room. Otani stood behind the counter in a bartender's uniform and greeted her with a smile. When Queen Bee glanced at his outfit, she covered her mouth and laughed. Otani's smile tightened for a moment, and she quickly stopped. She pretended to order wine, thumbed through the menu for a while, then finally picked today's recommendation. Queen Bee paid with a few coins and a small jar of honey, which Otani accepted with a nod before getting to work. He mixed with practiced ease. The cocktail shaker flew through his hands, up and down, and Queen Bee clapped in delight. Otani caught the shaker one-handed, opened it, and poured the drink into a goblet, finishing it with a slice of lemon. "Today's special, our Pokémon-style Bloody Mary," he said. Queen Bee took a careful sip. Her eyes lit up, and she drained it in one gulp, clearly asking for another. Otani made her a second glass, and this time she sipped slowly, savoring every drop. The doorbell rang. The leader of the Butterfree arrived, looking a little downcast. Seeing his expression, Otani scratched the back of his neck awkwardly and offered him a glass of wine. The Butterfree leader accepted it, took a sip, and then began to unload his worries to Otani. Most of what he said was about the little caterpillar, how much the child's mother missed him, and how anxious they were. Otani thought for a moment, then took out his phone and made a video call to Xiao Wu. Xiao Wu appeared on the screen, with the caterpillar curled up on his shoulder. They seemed to be resting in a room. Otani passed the phone to the Butterfree leader. At the sight of his father, the caterpillar pulled his head in and made a small, frightened chirp. "Foo-woo, foo-woo." "Woo," the Butterfree replied softly. Otani watched the short conversation. The father asked if the food outside was good and whether the little one had been bullied. The caterpillar answered cheerfully, full of energy, chattering about the sights he'd seen on his journey. The Butterfree leader listened in silence, relief breaking over his face as he heard how well his child was doing. He handed the phone back to Otani and, visibly lighter, went home in much better spirits. Otani rubbed his chin and wondered if he should install a multifunctional terminal on the farm, the kind you see in cartoons that can teleport Pokémon and make video calls. He mentioned the idea to Du, who was drinking nearby. Du gave a quick nod to show he understood. It was the tavern's first night, so only a few Pokémon came by. Around 8 o'clock, when no more customers arrived, Otani locked up and headed home. He sat in the living room, stroking Ibrahimovic and thinking quietly. Pokémon, he reflected, weren't so different from people. They had emotional intelligence, love, hate, even the desire for revenge. Over the next few days, word about the tavern spread through the Pokémon community. Otani soon found he couldn't handle everything on his own, so he asked his brother, who liked serving others, to come and work as a waiter. Du, with little choice, came along to help as well. Watari, who had no one to play chess with, would stop by the bar and order a drink to pass the time. While he drank, he liked to watch Charizard and Garchomp sitting at a small table, chatting and drinking like brothers. Watching them, Watari thought Otani was truly an impressive man. The bell above the bar jingled as Carter pushed the door open. He walked in with that faint, uncanny air he always seemed to carry. "Otani, I didn't expect your Pokémon bar to be doing so well," he called, settling onto a stool. Otani and Watari looked up and greeted him. Carter had been a little nervous the first time he met Du. Whatever Du was, he'd seemed intimidating at first, but after spending time around him, he'd discovered Du wasn't arrogant at all. That wariness had long since faded. Carter ordered a glass of wine and handed the money to Geely, who was with him. Geely asked for the same thing. Otani took the cash, mixed the drinks, and soon slid 2 glasses across the bar. Carter lifted his, inhaled the aroma, and drained it in one go. He clicked his tongue in approval. "Good stuff," he said, and ordered another. Geely copied him at first, taking his glass and downing it in one swallow, but he didn't order a second. Wine simply wasn't his favorite. Carter, on the other hand, had a few more, then stood to leave. He moved with that odd, brisk energy he always had. If he stayed out too long, his wife would give him hell. When the door closed behind them, Otani looked around the suddenly quiet pub and felt a small hollow where the laughter and conversation had been. For a moment, the room seemed emptier than usual. There was one problem Otani still hadn't solved. The tavern needed a resident singer, and since this was a Pokémon tavern, the singer had to be a Pokémon. He racked his brain for a while and came up empty, so he put the idea aside for the moment and switched on the music player, letting some pop tunes fill the room. Huabebe wanted a drink, and Dagu couldn't say no. He pretended to mix her a glass of juice, and she nursed it happily in small sips. Otani watched with mild surprise. The juice tasted uncannily like the wine he'd been serving. When closing time came, the patrons filtered out in 2s and 3s and headed home. The new multifunctional computer was installed quickly. Otani took time to demonstrate its features and patiently teach the Pokémon how to use it. Watching them reunite with relatives and friends they hadn't seen in a long time, the smiles and warm chatter, Otani felt the effort had been worthwhile. Word of the tavern had drawn curious visitors from the forest behind the building as well. Circle Bear arrived first. He offered some fruit as payment for a glass of wine, which Otani mixed and handed over. Circle Bear downed it in one gulp, and tears sprang to his eyes. It was that good. He ordered another glass and downed it in one swallow. When the third glass arrived, Otani leaned over and said to Quanquanshang, "Circle Bear," in a serious tone, "Don't get drunk. Take it easy." Quanquanshang scratched his head and gave a sheepish nod to show he understood. To Otani's surprise, a Gardevoir materialized in the doorway. A clear, feminine voice echoed in his mind. "Hello." Otani smiled and answered aloud, "Hello, Gardevoir. What would you like to drink?" She scanned the menu and asked for the special. Otani prepared it with practiced ease and handed the glass to her. The Gardevoir glanced briefly at Eevee and gave a gentle, approving nod. Otani frowned in confusion until Ibrahimovic leaned in and whispered about the tooth decay incident from last time. "Oh, so that's why," Otani said, realization dawning. "Because you helped Ibrahimovic before. This one's on me." "Thank you," Gardevoir replied, then offered a polite nod in return. Otani had thought about chatting with her a bit longer, but when it became clear she wasn't interested in anything sexual, he dropped the idea. She sipped twice, finished the drink, then left the bar and strolled out across the farm. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, but she didn't care. He stood on the grass for a long moment, then turned back and stared at the bar one last time. With a soft pop, he used teleportation and was gone. When the darkness closed in, Rada let out a long sigh of relief. Lately, there had been a lot of foreign Pokémon passing through, and the patrol team was stretched thin. The pub's official closing time was 8, but the Pokémon were reluctant to leave, and Otani had no real way to make them go. Their brother, who served as the butler, stepped forward and offered to keep the restaurant open until 10 and take care of the closing duties. Otani, exhausted, was reluctant at first, but his sister, who loved serving customers, insisted on helping with the daily chores. Otani considered it and decided he would keep handling the energy blocks himself. That was his specialty, and it would relieve his siblings of the heavier work. So it was settled. Starting tomorrow, the pub would stay open until 10. The Pokémon cheered, and Otani watched them with a small, pleased smile. The Pokémon headed back to their homes, many of them having made new friends at the bar. We walked back together, chatting as we went. Otani caught up with the group's leader, Rada, and gave her a gentle pat on the head. "Thanks for all your hard work lately," he said. Rada put a paw to her chest with a modest smile, as if to say it had been nothing. Otani returned the smile and quietly decided he would give Rada and the others a small bonus of cubes next time. Chapter 125. Fire. Deep in the forest by a quiet lake, Gardevoir sat hunched on a fallen log, coughing softly. Larula's lay curled across her lap, worry creasing his small face. "Larula's," she murmured, stroking his head. He gave a small shake of his own to show he was all right, clingy and coquettish as always. Gardevoir smiled despite herself, lifted him closer, and began to hum a gentle tune. His breathing evened out. He slipped into sleep before she even noticed. "I took a long time to find you, Gardevoir." A cold voice sliced through the stillness. A young man in strange silver clothing stepped from the bushes at the water's edge. "If you hadn't been carrying that GPS, I wouldn't have tracked you at all. Do you realize how much trouble you've caused since you ran away?" He sneered, taking a slow step forward. Gardevoir rose, cradling the sleeping Larulas and watching him warily. "Don't bother trying to run," the man said. "You're injured, and you're carrying someone. You can't escape." As he closed the distance, the ground beneath Gardevoir trembled. With a sudden violent surge, the earth split and something pushed up from below. Toxicodendron erupted from the soil, vines and thorns snapping outward toward them. Gardevoir tightened her arms around Larula's, eyes flashing as the attack descended. Despite reacting quickly, the purple venom still struck Gardevoir. She set Larula's gently on the ground and, through telepathy, urged her to run to safety. Larula's didn't want to leave, but Gardevoir shoved her aside with unexpected force. Larula's hesitated for a beat, then gritted her teeth and vanished with teleport. Tears streamed down Larula's cheeks as she disappeared. "Heh, don't be sad. You'll be reunited soon," the poison skull frog taunted and unleashed another blast of venom. Gardevoir sprang back and fired Psychic in reply. The frog's toxin struck the ground and ate a jagged crater into the earth. A purple miasma began to rise. Gardevoir clamped a hand over her mouth and nose, but she still inhaled some of the poison. Her whole body trembled. She grit her teeth and hung on, buying time for Larula's to get away. The frog sneered and used provocation, goading Gardevoir so she couldn't escape her rage and had to keep fighting. She answered desperately, her psychic energy flaring, but the poison skull frog casually swatted away the attack with one hand. Its face unreadable, it then drove forward with a precise, deadly poison needle. Gardevoir's body was already failing. It couldn't hold on any longer and sank to the ground. Before losing consciousness, he glanced anxiously toward the direction Larula's had fled, then went limp. The young man drew a capture net and gently lifted Gardevoir inside it. The poisonous frog Pokémon, Toxipus, stared at him. "It's fine," the young man said. "Alito will take care of him." Toxipus lingered at his side as he secured the net. The young man muttered under his breath, half to himself, "Pluto won't be able to complain to me anymore. I got his experimental materials back." He scanned the scorched traces of the fight, thinking for a moment. Then he produced a lighter, flicked it, and set the dead branches nearby alight. The dry autumn air took hold immediately. The flames spread with terrifying speed. He gave a casual wave to Toxipus, and the two of them left the clearing. Within minutes, a wall of fire roared up and thick smoke filled the sky. Pokémon that had been hiding in the water during the battle surfaced and watched in despair. Some tried to douse the blaze with water moves, but it was no use. The flames were already out of control. They huddled in the lake, clinging to one another and trembling with fear as the smoke thickened. All around them, the Pokémon were beginning to flee. At first they moved slowly, then panic spread like wildfire. They stampeded out of the forest in a chaotic rush. Otani, working on the farm, saw the dark plume rising in the distance and felt a cold prickle of dread. He dropped his tools, gathered his main team, and sprinted toward the smoke. Others who had seen it did the same. Some called for Miss Junsha, while others ran straight for the source without waiting. Otani leaped onto the broad back of the land shark and pushed onward. The closer he got, the worse it looked. It was a forest fire, already well alight and spreading faster than anyone could hope to douse by hand. He mentally flipped through what he remembered from his past life. First, establish a containment zone. Without hesitation, Otani released all his Pokémon and set them to work. Their orders were simple but urgent. Clear away every bit of flammable material along the fire's projected path, creating a fire break to slow and redirect the blaze before it could reach the populated areas. Just as Otani was about to act, a massive tremor shuddered through the forest. He looked up and saw countless Pokémon streaking through the sky, fleeing for their lives. If they didn't do something right away, the flames would cut them off. "Gyarados, blast the fire with Hydro Pump and hold it back so they can get out," Otani barked. "Raidenmon, use the 100,000-volt attack on the area beside them to herd them toward the opening. Snorlax, Kentaro, Bulbasaur, clear the perimeter and keep it open except for that escape corridor. Now!" Orders flew out and were answered. Wataru arrived moments later, releasing all of his Pokémon. Together with Otani's team, they formed a moving barrier, pushing flames back and carving a path through the burning undergrowth. People from the nearby settlements poured in and joined the effort as quickly as they could. Eevee floated up and, using its psychic powers, began to calm the panicking Pokémon below. Its influence soothed frayed nerves and helped them think clearly enough to follow the escape route. The Pokémon that reached the corridor ignored who had shouted the orders. Those with any strength left turned around to help pull others to safety, while the exhausted simply collapsed and rested where they could. They worked through the day and into the night, fighting wind, smoke, and heat. By the time the second dawn broke, the fire had finally been brought under control. Otani and Watari's Gyarados combined their surf attacks to wash away the last of the visible flames, but they couldn't afford to relax. The blaze might be out in the open, but smoldering embers hid among the charred trunks and leaf litter. The forest could flare up again at any moment. Trees had been burned down to blackened charcoal. The danger was far from over. Otani snapped on his protective gear and plunged into the smoke with his Pokémon at his side. He had to find any surviving creatures before the hidden fires spread. It was a race against time. Elsewhere in the same forest, Larula's was running on fumes. His powers were spent, and being small and exhausted, even a burst of speed wouldn't carry him far. Surrounded by flames and thick smoke, he soon lost his bearings. A shadowy figure trailed him, keeping silent. At last, Larula's could run no further. He caught his foot on a charred branch and tumbled forward. His head struck a stone, and he slipped into unconsciousness. Through the haze, Alito crept closer. He hesitated, then slowly drew his blade. Just as he was about to move, a sound came from nearby. He froze, then let out a silent, obvious sigh of relief. After one last look at the fallen Larula's, Alito sheathed his weapon and walked away. "Look, there's an unconscious Pokémon over there. Bulbasaur, pull him out." Bulbasaur's green vines sliced through the choking smoke and dragged Larula's free. Otani checked him quickly, unconscious and utterly exhausted, but otherwise okay. He told Thundermon to carry Larula's to a safe area and hand him over to Nurse Joy. Otani pressed on through the forest, trying to save every Pokémon he could find. Ibrahimovic was invaluable. He could pinpoint distressed Pokémon by sound and scent, cutting down search time when every minute counted. Time was the most precious thing now. Even so, Otani came across many that hadn't survived. There was no time to grieve at. He ordered that remains be handled carefully and not buried or left haphazardly. Improper disposal could trigger an epidemic. And then he moved on in silence with his team. For 7 days straight, he worked without rest. When the last rescue was done and the operations finally wound down, the taut line of his nerves suddenly snapped. Darkness crept in at the edges of his vision, and everything went black. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the terrified look on his Pokémon's face. "Sorry," he thought, "I was careless and made you worry." Chapter 26. Wake Up Otani had been in a coma for 5 days. During that time, Bulbasaur and the other Pokémon never left his bedside. No one could get close except Nurse Joy and Dew. Anyone else who tried was driven off immediately. Huabebe's eyes were swollen from crying. She had finally fallen asleep, curled up against Dagu's chest. In his dreams, Otani felt as if he'd been walking through a dark void for a long time. A familiar voice guided him onward. Darkray's voice. He ran as the darkness collapsed behind him. At the last moment, he leapt and plunged toward the only point of light. Back in the hospital room, Otani slowly came back to consciousness. He opened his eyes weakly. His lips were cracked and his throat felt like sand. "Water," he croaked. Bulbasaur, who had been dozing nearby, was startled awake by the sound and looked at him with wide, concerned eyes. Carefully, the Pokémon helped him drink. Ibrahimovic hurried off to fetch Nurse Joy. She arrived quickly and checked him over. "It's good he's awake," she said with visible relief. "He's no longer in any immediate danger. He just needs to rest." After a few sips of water, Otani's eyelids fluttered closed again. He fell into a light sleep, but his breathing evened out, and his vital signs were clearly much more stable. If Otani's condition had once been like a candle in the wind, it was now a steady, bright light. All the Pokémon breathed a collective sigh of relief. Still, one of them kept a constant vigil at his bedside. Dew stopped by to check on Otani. After making sure he was all right, he hurried away. Many people had come to visit during the coma. Grandpa Fumin and Grandma Shizi stood there, hearts aching as they watched Otani lying unconscious on the bed. Xiaofei had already cried herself out. "Kid," Grandpa Fumin murmured, "you're just like your parents, always ready to help others, no matter the risk to yourself." He trailed off, then began to speak about Otani's parents. It was the first time Bulbasaur and the others had heard their story. Otani had never mentioned it. His parents were forest rangers for the League, posted deep in the mountains and forests for long stretches of the year, with little time to rest. Even as a child, Otani had rarely complained. He'd always been remarkably sensible. His grandmother had died early, and for a long time, he and his grandfather had lived relying only on one another. "My family ran a farm, so I never had to worry about food or clothing as a child. That changed the day Otani's parents were killed while trying to suppress a riot of wild forest Pokémon. After that, Otani laughed less, and his personality grew more withdrawn and extreme. By the time he was 10, he'd already set his heart on becoming a trainer. When you get older, you tend to dwell on the past," Grandpa Fumin said with a sigh. "But now everything's all right. Otani's back, and we'll be fine." He guided Grandma Shizi and Xiaofei away. After the first time he'd regained consciousness, Otani fell into another coma that lasted 7 days. When he finally woke again, the world felt foreign to him. During that long sleep, Darkrai had haunted his dreams, always by his side. Otani tried to sit up, but his muscles protested after lying still so long. Lushark noticed and gently shook the bed until Otani steadied himself. In a soft, apologetic voice, he murmured, "I'm sorry for worrying you. Don't worry, I'll be all right soon." No one blamed him. Lushark, Landshark, and the others only cared that Otani was awake. Otani spent a month convalescing in the hospital. During that time, everyone came to see him. He was only allowed to leave after Miss Joy finally confirmed he had fully recovered. At the hospital entrance, he took a long, gratifying stretch. The sun hung high in a clear autumn sky, and a gentle breeze stirred the air, oddly comforting. "Let's go home," he said. His Pokémon cheered. Otani swung up onto Kintaro's back, and in his eagerness, promptly forgot Miss Joy's parting instructions. All he wanted was to get back to the farm. Home was, just as he'd left it, peaceful and bustling with life. Seeing the farm calm and orderly eased him. The Pokémon gathered around, clearly worried about him. Their concern warmed him more than he expected. The whole episode had a silver lining. His powers, which had never seemed to improve before, had at last advanced to a higher level. He could now use his mental energy to manipulate objects more automatically, without the constant effort it used to take. After a few more days of rest on the farm, Otani felt completely well and went back to his daily routines. Then, quite suddenly, Watari arrived carrying a Larulus. "This little one has been repeating your name," he said. When they asked him, he couldn't say why. Miss Joy examined his head and found damage from a blow and smoke. He must have lost his memory. Watari looked at Larulus with pity. Larulus stared at Otani with a blank curiosity. Otani returned the look. The boy was shockingly thin, skinnier even than Tai Dumbbell had been when he first arrived at the farm. Otani thought it a miracle he was still alive. With a pang in his chest, he scooped Larulus up. The child felt absurdly light. "Just come with me from now on, okay?" Otani said gently, softening his voice as he reached for him. Larulus didn't know why, but the tears started anyway. They wouldn't stop, no matter how hard he tried. The small face that had been staring blankly at Otani broke into weeping. Otani felt his own throat tighten and patted the child's head. "Don't be afraid. I'll protect you." The crying slipped from quiet sobs into a raw howl. "It's okay to cry," Otani murmured, holding him. Larulus clung to Otani's shirt and buried his face in his chest, his tears soaked through. After a while, exhausted, the crying slowed and finally stopped. Otani sat very still, watching until Larulus finally drifted off. He adjusted the small Pokémon in his arms with a careful, almost reverent motion, then rocked him gently the way someone would soothe a child. When he was sure Larulus was asleep, Otani's eyes closed too, and he dozed for a moment. Watari watched them, saw there was nothing more he could do there, gave Otani a short, understanding nod, and left. He had to follow up on the fire, and he had a strong feeling it hadn't been an accident. A blaze starting that close to the lake made no sense. There were other suspicious traces around the scene, but most of them had been consumed by the flames. The evidence was almost entirely gone. The damage was staggering. The forest fire had caused billions of dollars in direct losses across the Kanto region. Recovery would take years and would require the full mobilization of the Kanto Alliance. Otani felt powerless in the face of something that big. Even if a Bulbasaur had fought until it collapsed, the forest could not be repaired overnight. Its restoration would be slow and collective. All the dead Pokémon had been gathered and laid to rest together in a newly opened Pokémon cemetery at the edge of the forest. It was small and simple, only a modest tower stood inside, but it was the place where they buried what the fire had taken. Otani dropped by now and then to help with the cleanup. The League still hadn't assigned anyone to oversee the site. Staff were stretched thin. Dudu, who was supposed to be on annual leave, had been pulled back into duty. Otani quietly vowed that if the fire turned out to be caused by human action, he would find whoever was responsible and bring them to justice for the innocent Pokémon that had died. Chapter 127. Check-in at Tianguan Mountain. Known among trainers as the Frost Milk Fairy, Frostmilk rode eagerly on a blue crow, eyes bright as the landscape of Sinnoh unfolded beneath her. Mew and Celebi rode with her, both of them as carefree as ever. After traveling across half of the Kanto region under Frostmilk's leadership, the team had finally arrived in Sinnoh, and their first stop was the region's most famous peak, Tianguan Mountain. Tianguan was a snowbound range of rolling ridges and permanent ice, a place where the magnetic field ran strange and strong. Those peculiar electromagnetic waves could trigger the evolution of Magnemite and Magneton into the powerful Magnezone. The deeper into the mountain, the more formidable the Pokémon became. The magnetic interference was so intense that ordinary high-tech equipment could fail unless it had been specifically shielded against it. For that reason, the mountain saw few human visitors. Only the most determined or powerful trainers came here to train. The team landed near the foot of Tianguan Mountain on a flat stretch of snow. Frostmilk dismounted with practiced ease, then produced a small tin of cream from her pack and began offering it to the curious wild Pokémon gathered nearby. Within moments she had coaxed them closer, her easy charm doing the work of ice and sugar. It was a simple scene, but it showcased exactly what everyone already knew about her. Frostmilk had a talent for making friends, even in a place as wild and forbidding as Tianguan Mountain. With the help of the locals, they soon had enough food. Frost Fairy waved goodbye to their new friends and sat down to eat with Mengwan and the others. Charmander lingered at the edge of the group, cool and aloof as ever. The others were used to his standoffishness, though. Frostmilk and the rest set aside a portion for him and began eating. Huan bit into a piece of fruit with a small, sad face. "I've missed him every day since we left Otani," she said. "Mama?" Frost Fairy looked at her in confusion. Huan let out a soft, plaintive meow. Meow. When Frostmilk heard that, she froze for a moment, then forced a smile and patted her chest to show everything was all right. A quiet settled over the group. The little Mew came again. Meow. Menghuan suddenly covered her mouth and burst out laughing. "What a liar," she teased. Frostmilk leapt up and began to chase Menghuan around playfully, their laughter breaking the tension. Then Frost Fairy stumbled and fell. The ground beneath her trembled, swelling slowly upward until a huge steel serpent surfaced, a Steelix. Charmander stayed where he was, calm and uninterested in intervening. Frostmilk, wide-eyed and trembling, had landed on Steelix's head. Steelix shook its head and Frostmilk slipped off. Blue Crow was quick enough to catch her before she hit the ground. Dreamy squealed with delight and looped around the giant Pokémon. Steelix, still a little groggy from waking, gave the adventuring party a lazy glance and then burrowed back into the earth. It dawned on them why the spot they'd been resting on had been so perfectly flat. They had been sitting on Steelix's head. Charmander had known that already. He hadn't said anything because against a foe of Steelix's size, one well-placed strike would have been enough to put it out of commission. Frostmilk clutched her stomach, looking put out. She hadn't managed to eat much of the tree fruit earlier. Celebi produced the one fruit he hadn't eaten and offered it to her. Frostmilk accepted it with a surprised look and began nibbling at it. Charmander guided his own portion over with a mental nudge and flew toward Frostmilk. "Mama?" he asked softly. She nodded, and he landed, Blue Crow settling beside him. After they finished eating, the adventuring team resumed their exploration. Although Tianguan Mountain had been chosen as their first stop, Frostmilk Fairy didn't rush in. The terrain was unfamiliar, and stepping inside without knowing what to expect would be close to suicide. Using their good scouting skek, ills, and special equipment, they were able to sketch out the basic layout quickly. In the southern reaches of the mountain, there were two entrances, one on the east side near Haijin City, and the other on the west side near Jiayuan City. The Jiayuan entrance led up to the slopes and toward the summit. The interior of Tianguan Mountain was tangled and maze-like, inhabited by a wide variety of Pokémon. Frostmilk Fairy questioned several locals about the inside of the mountain, but none could or would give her useful information. The only consistent response she got was a single warning: it was very dangerous in there. She hesitated. Wanhuan was the first to voice a desire to go in and see what was happening for himself, but Frostmilk Fairy refused to act on impulse. After traveling for so long, caution had become her most reliable weapon. Frost Fairy decided to approach Black Gold City cautiously. Rather than plunging straight into the heart of the city, she would scout the outskirts first, gather information, then move inward when they knew more. With the plan settled, the adventure team took a short rest and set off toward the city. As dusk fell, they came across a massive power station. Rows of towering turbines and giant fans turned lazily in the cooling breeze. Since the site lay close to Tianguan Mountain and benefited from steady winds, the Alliance had built a wind power station there to harvest electricity. It was getting dark, so the team agreed to stop for the night and continue their exploration in the morning. Frost Fairy quickly struck up a rapport with the local Pokémon and arranged for the group to stay. The station's guardian was a formidable Electabuzz who greeted them warmly and offered shelter for the night. The hum of the turbines and the soft glow of control panels made for an oddly peaceful camp. But they were not the only ones moving through the plant that evening. A short distance away, men in silver uniforms slipped through a maintenance hatch and crouched in the shadows. "Everyone ready?" the leader asked quietly. "Ready, Master Zhenxing," a young man replied. "Then begin." Zhenxing nodded and signaled. The squad melted outward, spreading to take up positions around the power station. An elderly man wearing a monocle stepped forward. "Zhenxing, don't mess this up again." "Humph." Zhenxing bristled, but said nothing. He pushed past the old man and followed the team into the power plant. "Pluto, are all the systems online?" he asked. "Relax," Pluto replied. "This facility is cut off from the outside world. I'm not going to let anything slip through." Pluto, Hades to some, stroked his beard with obvious pride. Zhenxing's expression hardened. He still remembered the last time. Alito had failed to bring Larula's back, and Pluto had teased him for it for weeks. The leader had forgiven him then and given him a new, critical assignment to extract the energy stored in this very power plant. He would not let it fail now. Zhenxing snorted and moved to take command. With practiced efficiency, he seized control of the facility. Outside, no one had any idea what was happening inside. Far to the east of the station at the Wanji Town Elf Center, Miss Joy paced while repeatedly calling her husband. The line kept coming up busy. "What? It's this late and you're not home, and you won't even pick up?" she cried, equal parts angry and worried. Beside her, Happy Egg chirped softly, trying to soothe her. "Okay, don't say anything nice to him. Call again later. If he still doesn't answer, we'll go check it out." Miss Joy gave Happiny a small, reproachful look. I don't know why. Even though Happiny was her Pokémon, Miss Joy always seemed unusually attached to her husband. By the time they finished their shift at the Pokémon Center, it was completely dark. Miss Joy drove to a spot just off the road near the power station and stopped the car. From where we stood, the station was unnervingly quiet. It should have been blazing with light, but the windows and floodlights were all dark. A bad feeling heightened in Miss Joy's chest. She didn't rush in. Whatever was going on inside was clearly wrong, and charging in without information could make things worse. The sensible choice was to call Junsha and get backup. Junsha picked up right away and said she was on her way. Within minutes, a small group of people arrived at the power station. Chapter 128, Fierce Battle at the Power Plant. The adventure team sets out. Junsha swung off the motorcycle and hurried over to Joy. "What's the situation inside now?" she asked. Joy shook her head. "I don't know. As soon as I noticed something was wrong, I called the police." Junsha frowned. "That's not ideal. Windspeed, see if you can find out how many people are in there." Windspeed, the eager, broad-nosed dog at her side, gave a serious nod, lifted his head, and began sniffing. He picked up a tangle of unfamiliar scents. After a few moments, he barked to report his estimate. There were at least a dozen people. Then Windspeed barked again, more urgently. Junsha's heart tightened. "They aren't that many," she translated, "but they have hostages." The team fell silent, weighing their options. From the nearby bushes, Frost Milk Fairy, small, stubby-legged, and always ready to right a wrong, had heard everything. The little creature's eyes brightened at the chance to help. It scurried forward on short legs, eager for action. Windspeed paused, sniffed toward the bushes, and detected the faint scent of cream. "What's that smell, Windspeed?" someone asked. Windspeed barked once more. "Is it a Pokémon?" someone whispered. "We can't rule out the possibility we've already been exposed. Gather everyone. We need to decide on a plan." Frost Fairy moved quickly, rounding up the members of the adventure team and repeating what she'd just heard. Mew and Celebi fell in line immediately. Blue Jay nodded in agreement, albeit more hesitantly. All three then turned their attention to Charmander. He sighed, shrugged, and gave a resigned nod. Frost Fairy went to find Electabuzz and asked if there were any other entrances to the power plant. Electabuzz rubbed his chin, glanced at the team, and motioned for them to follow. He led them to a hidden corner of the perimeter, pushed aside a clump of grass, pried up a loose wooden board, and revealed a large hole in the wall. Electabuzz had dug it himself years ago to make sneaking into the plant easier when he pilfered electricity. The workers at the plant knew about the gap but mostly looked the other way. There was so much power at the station that a few pilfering Pokémon didn't matter. That little tunnel suddenly became the team's solution. Back at the gathering, Frost Fairy laid out the plan in detail. Celebi, Mew, and Charmander would slip in through Electabuzz's hidden entrance and try to free the hostages while the rest of the team provided support outside. She, Crow, and Electabuzz drew the attention of everyone inside the plant, buying as much time as they could. The plan was simple and effective. While they kept the guards occupied, Celebi and its team slipped quietly into the power station to search for the hostages. Outside, Electabuzz and Frostmilk stirred up a ruckus to lure the staff away from the building. Soon a 5-man squad emerged. When the electric Pokémon saw them, it thrust up an arm and unleashed a 100,000-volt discharge, then sprinted off without looking back. The squad scrambled to avoid the blast and immediately called out their Pokémon in pursuit. After Electabuzz retreated, Frostmilk and Blue Jay reappeared, wreaking havoc in a different area and drawing another patrol. Inside the plant, Genshin frowned and glanced toward his aide. "What's going on out there?" "My lord, some wild Pokémon have shown up. I've sent teams to deal with them." Genshin's expression hardened. "Good. Once the energy is collected, we pull back and deal with the hostages. Do you understand?" He said it coldly. The aide bowed his head. "Yes, sir." Genshin glanced at the collection device, progress meter hovering at 50%. He kept watching, while elsewhere in the power plant, Menghuan and her team closed in on the hostages' location. They found 2 guards posted outside the room. Menghuan drifted close to one and whispered, almost playfully, "Hey, do you feel a chill?" The guard blinked. "No, you okay? Didn't sleep well last night?" The other guard frowned suspiciously. Menghuan stifled a quiet chuckle. A faint laugh echoed down the corridor. "Who's there? Who said that?" Both men snapped to attention for a heartbeat, then their eyes rolled back, and they slumped, fast asleep. Charmander appeared and moved in to finish the job, quickly disabling both guards. Menghuan smiled at him, pleased. Charmander ignored her grin, went to the door, unlocked it, and pushed it open. As he entered, he raised a hand to stop a middle-aged man who sprang toward them. "Pokémon?" the man demanded, startled. Charmander eased his hold. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. We're here to rescue you," he said calmly. The man's relief turned to worry. "What's going on out there? Is it safe?" Charmander said nothing. He simply turned and walked out of the room to take a look for himself. The middle-aged man moved through it once, and the others exchanged glances before following carefully. Celebi and Mew had already slipped away. Those two never revealed themselves to strangers. Charmander led the group out of the power station, slipping past the guards and into the tunnel the electric Pokémon had dug. "So this is what it was for," the middle-aged man murmured, surprised. "I never imagined that what we ignored back then would be our lifeline now." Casting aside any pride, he plunged ahead. They made it out quietly. All the hostages were rescued. By the time the plant staff realized what had happened, all they found were two guards lying unconscious on the floor. "Damn it!" Genqing snarled. He stared at the collection device. It was almost finished. Outside, Miss Junsha and her team had already launched their attack. Reluctantly, Genqing clenched his teeth, grabbed the device, and barked an order. "Retreat!" He led his men out quickly, while the others wiped away any signs of their presence. When Miss Junsha and her team finally entered the power plant, there was nothing left to find. It was empty. After an inspection, the plant managers discovered that the power station had only lost part of its energy. Nothing else had been damaged. "You said it was a little Charmander with superpowers who saved you?" Miss Joy asked, surprised. She found the idea hard to believe, but she trusted her husband. He wasn't the sort of man to make things up. The volunteer rescue team that had done the good deed had long since moved on. In truth, it was Electabuzz who had dug a hole and gotten everyone out of harm's way. Because of that act, the plant officially brought him on to the security force. The incident also made management realize their security was too thin, so they recruited a number of nearby Pokémon willing to help. Electabuzz, having been the first to arrive and clearly the strongest, was made captain. Electabuzz felt as if he were dreaming. In a single night, he went from being an outsider to a regular employee, with free food and lodging, a salary, and even a little brother to look after. He was certain he owed his good fortune to Frosty Milk Fairy. She was his lucky star, and he vowed he'd never forget that little friend. After a night's rest, Frost Milk Fairy and her companions arrived at Black Gold City early the next morning. They touched down just outside the walls and strolled into town with quiet confidence. With Celebi and Mew gone, the crowd only saw Crow, Frostnant, and Charmander, and assumed they were a trainer's Pokémon out for a leisurely wander. No one noticed, however, that from a shadowed corner, a small group of Pokémon had been watching them, eyes fixed and calculating. Chapter 129, Problem Child +1. Since Larula's arrived at the farm, he had barely left Otani's side. The moment Otani stepped away for even a few seconds, Larula's would start crying. Otani had examined him carefully. He was still an infant, born only recently, and his physical development was shockingly slow. Otani didn't dare give him energy cubes. He feared Larula's fragile body wouldn't be able to handle them. For now, he fed him only tiny amounts of diluted tree sap mixed with moo milk and let him recover gradually. Otani believed that with steady care and time, Larula's could make up for his congenital deficiencies. What worried Otani most, though, wasn't the body but the mind. Larula's had been through far too much for one so young. Psychological scars were to be expected. There wasn't much Otani could do about the past. All he could offer was a calm, stable home and regular counseling, steady patience and predictable routines to help rebuild a sense of safety. That morning, as Otani walked Larula's around the yard, a muck eagle suddenly dove from the sky and landed nearby, clutching a small envelope in its beak. Otani recognized the handwriting at a glance. The letter was from Frost Milk Fairy and the others. He took several envelopes from his pocket and handed them to Mukiying. Mukiying opened one, while Mek Eagle happily gobbled an energy cube. Otani glanced at the little stick figure creature still stirring and felt a smile tug at his lips. Inside the envelope were a few photographs. Otani knew the place immediately, Tenkoan Mountain in Sinnoh. The expedition team had actually reached the abyss. He was a touch surprised. Tucked beneath the photos was an exquisitely preserved leaf specimen. Otani carefully put it away and then had a thought. Muck Eagle, can you still find Frost Milk Fairy and the others? Muck. Mukiying hesitated for a moment, considered, and then nodded. Otani brightened. Good. Wait here for me a little while. I have something I want you to take to them. He carried Larula's into the house and returned shortly with a backpack. He packed it with the food he'd prepared and a few emergency supplies, ready for Mukiing to deliver. Otani guessed that the food he'd sent last time must be nearly gone, so he packed a little more and sent it along again. In truth, all the produce that had come from the farm had been grown by the adventuring team in just 1 week. He scooped an extra handful of cube-shaped rations and fed them to Mkay's eagle. The eagle's eyes brightened. It gulped down the cubes, beat its wings once as if to promise a safe delivery, then seized the backpack in its talons and flew off. Otani waved until the bird was a speck against the sky, then turned back to continue Larula's walk. After a few days of rest, Larulus was clearly improved from when he first arrived, though he was still thin. Otani had a guess about the baby's mother. He'd only seen one Gardevoir in the area, and it seemed likely that Larulus was her child. The thought of the fire made him wince. He hadn't visited the place in a long time. Larulus must have been caught up in that disaster. In the forest, a group of Pokémon stood and watched the scarred land with heavy hearts. The fire had left the place in ruins, and now autumn was settling over the charred ground. If they couldn't find a safe place to start over, winter would be brutal. Kuzokumo had come earlier to scout and help, and when he saw how many Pokémon were suddenly homeless, his expression hardened. He stepped out of the bushes, and the smallest creatures shrank back at the sight of him. Circle Bear hurried forward and did his best to calm them, soft, friendly rumbles meant to show he meant no harm. When the others heard those reassuring sounds, they exchanged uncertain glances. Most ignored Circle Bear's attempts and left with their families. Only a handful stayed behind to see what would happen. Twisty looked down on the ones who fled. "You don't know what you're missing," he thought, with a hint of contempt. Kuzokumo gathered the remaining Pokémon and led them toward Otani's farm. The journey was smooth. When they passed through other territories, local leaders bowed or otherwise showed them respect. They arrived at Otani's place the next morning. Otani woke confused. Why had Kuzokumo brought so many Pokémon? What did he intend? Circle Bear padded up and began whispering low, urgent roars into Otani's ear, explaining the situation as best he could. Dagu rolled his eyes at the sight and muttered, "Thanks a lot," his tone heavy with sarcasm, but the matter was already in motion. "You just play the good bear and I'll do the hard work, okay?" They'd brought so many Pokémon with them that they couldn't simply send them back. Otani sighed, then smiled gently. "Bring them to the farm," he ordered. "Tell the butler siblings to prepare a lot of food and plenty of moo-moo milk." He'd done a quick count a little while ago. There were a few hundred of them, all sorts of Pokémon, mostly common to the Kanto region. After thinking for a moment, Otani decided to settle them in the orchard first. There was plenty of food among the trees. Between that and his own support, the little ones would recover quickly. If any chose to stay on the farm permanently, they could help pick fruit or join the patrols. It was an unspoken rule of the place. Nobody, human or Pokémon, ate and drank for free. Even Snorlax Otani expected everyone to do some work within their ability. So the Pokémon were brought to the farm and settled in the orchard. A few of the Rattata still had burns. If those weren't treated promptly, infections would set in. Otani tended their wounds. They looked a little odd without their fur, but it would grow back soon. Still, the Pokémon were clearly downcast. Otani sat quietly and stroked a small Rattata's head. "You know," he said softly, "after a fire the forest often comes back even stronger." The Pokémon blinked at him, unsure. Otani smiled and explained, "The ash from burned trees is full of nutrients. Surviving seeds take root, and in spring new shoots will push up. The burned area recovers fast and can become more lush than before. That's the way nature works." Life was a cycle. Destruction would be followed by rebirth. Huabebe didn't fully understand, but at least she was happy. "Bebe, Bebe!" And her cheer spread. The others brightened too. When Otani saw their spirits lifting, he went over what would be expected of them if they stayed. The tasks weren't controversial, mainly picking fruit. The Pokémon accepted the work without complaint. It was familiar and not tiring, something they often did in the forest. Chapter 130, Thanksgiving at the End of Autumn. Late autumn had sharpened the air. When the wind blew, it carried a clean, noticeable chill. Otani watched the Pokémon moving past him, laughing, playing, going about their business, and felt a little lighter. Most of them had their own ways of weathering a harsh winter, so he told himself not to worry too much. Still, the forecast warned of a cold wave next week, so he'd have to make time to visit the outlying areas and make sure nothing was wrong. The farm itself stayed green year-round thanks to the Bulbasaur and other grass-type Pokémon tending the fields, but that didn't mean they could control the weather. Even a Venusaur couldn't stop snow from falling. He remembered last winter well, snow that lasted nearly 2 months, and that memory made him tighten his schedule. Back in his room, he opened the farm ledger. The balance for the year so far read 1 billion. He snapped the book shut and sighed. The more you earn, the more you spend, especially now, with the Olympus venue under construction and half his income sunk into it. The rest went to running the farm, feed for several big eaters, and the many Pokémon he was responsible for. Even after buying a fresh supply of super cubes, it was a relief to see we still had 1 billion left in reserve. That evening, Oishi spotted Otani and called out cheerfully, "Otani, how are the autumn festival preparations coming along?" Otani laughed confidently. "Don't worry, there'll be plenty of cookies." "I'm glad to hear it," Oishi said. "I was still thinking about your cookies from last year. By the way, has the mayor come by to see you?" "Not yet. Why?" "Never mind." Oishi glanced down the path. "Oh, I just saw him walking this way. He'll probably want to speak with you. I'll head off." With that, Oishi gathered his things and drove away. Otani waited, and sure enough, the old mayor arrived a few minutes later. The mayor greeted him with a kindly smile. "Good afternoon, Otani." "Good afternoon, Mayor," Otani replied. "Ha ha!" the mayor chuckled. "Your cookies were the unanimous favorite last year. This year the celebration will again be held in the square, and everyone agreed. We want you to be in charge of the festival's ceremonial soup." Otani flushed a little. "Oh, Mayor, I'm honored, but isn't that usually reserved for our respected elders?" "Ha ha ha, those others can't cook like you," the mayor laughed easily. "All right then, don't forget to bring whatever crops you can spare from the farm." With that, he took his leave. Otani walked him to the gate, saw him off, and then returned to the house to prepare for the next day. By 9 the following morning, the town square was packed. People had come from every neighborhood for the festival. The air hummed with excited chatter. Larulas, who had never been to one before, stared wide-eyed at the crowds and, for the moment, forgot to be frightened. The mayor climbed the long-prepared podium and raised his voice. "It's been another good harvest. I now declare the autumn Thanksgiving ceremony officially open." Applause rolled through the crowd like thunder. For the celebration, Otani had brought out every Pokémon he could spare. Brother Ai, the household's butler, was there to help him. Making soup for the whole town was hard work, and they'd needed a pot big enough to feed hundreds at once. It had been custom-made for festivals years ago. The iron was dark with age, its surface worn smooth and shining with the seasoned patina of many meals. Steam rose from it in a steady column as people began to gather around, eager for the first ladleful. After Otani handed out the biscuits he'd brought, he climbed up onto the platform to start making the sacrificial soup. There was a strict rule about the soup's ingredients. Only produce grown on the farm could be used. Otani knew that this had not always been the case. Once, someone had carelessly tossed poisonous mountain mushrooms into the pot, and a lot of people had come down with severe diarrhea. That incident is what had brought in the rule. The butler used his supernatural ability to help prepare the vegetables and herbs, placing them into the large cauldron in batches exactly as Otani instructed. Otani struggled to lift the huge stirring spoon, then set to work. Seasonings were added one by one, and soon the savory smell spread through the whole square. Everyone turned to watch him. His mouth watered before he even realized it. About an hour later, dinner time came, and the soup was ready. The staff began ladling it out while Otani sat down, sweating from the effort, and took a grateful sip of the soup he'd made. No wonder he'd managed to make such a delicious pot. He'd put his whole self into it. The mayor tasted the soup Otani had made and couldn't help but be pleased with his choice. He'd long been tired of the town's usual offerings, soups that were either too salty, too bland, or even undercooked. This one, by contrast, was perfect. He'd wagered that the sacrificial pot would be emptied in no time. The sacrificial soup had been intended as a ceremonial formality, but the recipe made it the hottest item at the festival. Before long, some people were missing out, and when the food began to run short again, the mayor had to step in to calm things down. Once he sorted it out, the crowd settled, the mood lightened, and the celebrations went on. The festival stretched into the evening, and the night market hummed with business. Families in traditional dress strolled between stalls piled high with food and trinkets. Otani had brought his Pokémon with him, and together they wandered through rows of entertainment booths, ring toss, balloon darts, goldfish scooping, and more. Otani showed Larulas how to throw the rings. For the first time, Larula smiled. They spent the night happily enjoying the market. They played until late into the night. When Otani finally headed back to the farm with his Pokémon, Larulas' smile never faded. A weight lifted from Otani's chest. Larulas' long-standing emotional problems had always been a knot in his heart, and the garden party had eased many of those worries. It was a pleasant surprise. Back at the farm, Larulas was noticeably more energetic. He kept pestering Otani, chattering excitedly about how much fun the games had been. Otani listened with a patient smile, showing no sign of impatience. Eventually, Larulas yawned and drifted off in Otani's arms. Otani gently laid him on the bed, washed up, and prepared for sleep. In the morning, Larulas woke early and immediately began pestering Otani to play again. Otani crouched down and apologetically explained that the special games only happened once a year, but that Larulas could still play with the other Pokémon on the farm. Larulas hesitated for a moment, then nodded bravely. Otani felt a rush of relief. Seeing him take that small step meant the knot in his heart had loosened considerably. The happiest of all was Huabebe. Making friends was her favorite thing. After breakfast, Huabebe eagerly took Larulas to play with her friends. At first he was a little shy, but he gradually relaxed and soon ran right into the game. A smile spread across his face, and Otani watched the scene with his own smile. Seeing Larulas so happy made him feel a quiet, indescribable joy. Chapter 131. Oh my God! Teacup has long legs! A cold wave rolled in, and winter arrived almost overnight. It hadn't started snowing yet, but it was time for thicker clothes. Early that morning, Otani breathed on his hands and went about cleaning the resting tower in the cemetery. He had named it the Tower of Rest, hoping that the Pokémon who died in the fire could finally find peace and no longer suffer. Maybe there was an underworld in the Pokémon world. Maybe they could feel his intentions. Leaves carpeted the ground now that the season had turned. Otani took up a broom and swept the bluestone path with gentle, rustling strokes. The surrounding woods were unusually still. Darkrai seldom emerged from the valley's shadows to wander these days. "Hey, Darkrai. You look pretty good today," Otani said, half teasing. Normally, Darkrai only came out at night, after Otani had gone to sleep. The last time they'd been in the hospital, Darkrai had used some mysterious method to save Otani's life, and afterward, it had been quiet for a long time. Otani was very grateful to Darkrai. To thank him and to help speed his recovery, Otani prepared a large assortment of delicious food. After moving around a little, Darkrai slipped back into the shadows. By then, Otani had almost finished cleaning. He packed up his tools, left the cemetery, and walked back toward the farm. Inside the Tower of Rest, a dark purple shadow pooled and concentrated. Two small eyes opened and blinked. The shadow stirred, sniffed the air sharply as if it had picked up a scent, and then slipped through the tower wall to get a better sense of the direction. It followed the same path that ran through the big valley and began making its way toward the farm. Back at home, Otani made himself a hot cup of tea and took a long, satisfying sip. On a cold day, there was nothing more comforting. When he finished, he set the cup down and headed back out to the fields. By the time he reached the farmland, Meow Meow and the others were already hard at work. Today, they had to harvest all the radishes they'd planted and store them in the cellar so they'd have vegetables for the winter. Many Pokémon were on the farm, eating and helping with the harvest. They weren't preparing a full meal, just vegetables to serve as side dishes. While Otani and the others worked, a shadow slid along the floor, slipped into Otani's house, and landed on a teacup sitting on the table. Two bright little eyes peered out, and whatever it was crawled into the cup. The teacup began to change. Delicate patterns formed across the glaze, the porcelain deepened to purple, and two large eyes appeared on its side. A tiny voice murmured, "Cup." The brother who liked to keep the house tidy, our neat older brother, heard the faint sound and turned, puzzled. "Huh?" I scanned again with my mental sight, but still perceived nothing unusual. The brother, cautious, pretended not to notice and went back to cleaning. Lai Beicha opened one eye slightly, glanced at him, and let out a quiet sigh of relief. She shifted her weight and whispered again, "Cup." Even that soft sound caught the brother's attention. He snapped his head around. Lai Beicha immediately repeated her old trick and shrank back down into the teacup, disguising herself. The brother walked over to the table, frowning as he looked at the surface. Huh? Why was there suddenly an extra purple teacup on the table? The butler knew every object in Otani's house by heart. He even remembered the purple teacup that always sat on the side table. So when his hand reached for the cup and it slid away on its own, he froze. "What?" he whispered, rubbing his eyes as if he might be imagining it. When he reached again, the cup scooted aside once more. He stumbled back, pressed himself against the wall, and stared at the teacup in wide-eyed horror. What is that?" he stammered. Their sister, the housekeeper, poked her head out of the kitchen. "What's wrong?" she asked, puzzled by his expression. He darted behind her and pointed with trembling fingers at the cup and the table. The housekeeper came forward, picked it up, and examined it curiously. "When did we get a cup this color? It's really beautiful." But as she lifted it, something small and alive inside the cup revealed itself. The girl, Lai Beicha, was curled up in the saucer, clinging to the porcelain. In the housekeeper's hands, she was visibly frightened and had stopped pretending whatever game she'd been playing. The maid blinked in surprise, but quickly composed herself and set the teacup down on the table. The housekeeper gave a gentle greeting. Lai Beicha responded to the kindness with a bright, happy chirp. The housekeeper's surprise deepened. She had never seen a Pokémon shaped like a teacup before, not even in the old master's household. "Where did you come from?" she asked. Lai Beicha shook his little cup head and tried to explain. He didn't know where he'd come from. He'd woken up in a very dark place, then opened his eyes and smelled a familiar, pleasant scent that had drawn him here. The two Pokémon continued to chatter cheerfully, but the butler hung back, clearly uneasy. He'd read about ghost Pokémon in a book as a child, stories that said they survive by draining the life force of people and other Pokémon, leaving their victims lifeless. That warning had left a shadow on him he couldn't quite shake, and he wasn't about to get any closer to a teacup-shaped stranger. "Peekaboo!" The maid cocked her head at her brother, puzzled for a moment, then brightened as if she'd thought of something. She covered her mouth with a hand, smiled, lifted her teacup with both hands, and stepped toward him. "Peekaboo!" The butler yelped, used a blink of teleportation, and began to dodge away. His sister, however, chased after him without letting up. He had wanted to keep up his dignity, but his legs went weak the instant he saw Lai Beicha. Not bothering to scold his sister, he spun around and fled. The maid giggled and waved the teacup as if to tease him. Lai Beicha, thinking it a game, grinned happily in the maid's arms. At the sound of laughter, the butler ran even faster. When Otani and the others finished their work and opened the door, they found the scene. The butler streaking ahead with his sister in pursuit, teacup held high. When the butler spotted Dagu, he looked as if he'd found a savior. He dove behind Dagu and stuck out only half his head, peering around cautiously at his sister. The housekeeper, his sister, blushed a little when she saw Otani, and in a playful tease, stuck her tongue out at him. Otani glanced around the messy room but showed no sign of irritation. "It's rare to see you so lively," he said with a smile. Then his expression froze. The teacup the maid was holding was his most treasured one, a keepsake from his grandfather. The set had been 4 cups and a teapot. Now one of those cups had somehow ended up with the group that had come to Beicha. He felt a stab of regret, but he didn't blame Lai Beicha. Instead, he kept his tone light and cordial. "Hello, little cup?" Lai Beicha bobbed up happily and flew over to hover in front of Dagu, eyes narrowed into delighted crescents. She was so pleased she chirped. Cup. Chapter 132. Otani and his new recruit. In the living room, Otani listened as Beicha filled in the missing pieces. Suddenly, it all made sense. Beicha had come from the Tower of Rest. No wonder Darkrai had appeared earlier. He'd sensed the presence of a ghost-type Pokémon and gone to investigate. When Darkrai realized there was no danger, he slipped back into Otani's shadow. Otani looked down and gave his shadow a small, grateful nod. The shadow trembled almost imperceptibly in reply. He turned back to Beicha and asked, hopeful, "So, would you like to stay here?" "Cup," Beicha answered, nodding happily. "That's great," Otani said, smiling. "But please take good care of this teacup. It's one of my most precious things." "Cup," Beicha nodded vigorously, promising he would. "Then you're officially part of our big family. Welcome to Beicha," Otani declared. "Cup," Beicha chirped in delight. At lunchtime, Otani formally introduced Beicha to the others. Beicha was a little shy at first, but with Otani's encouragement, she spoke up loudly and clearly, calling, "Bebe, Bebe." Hua Bebe bounded forward happily to greet her. The two little ones were soon playing together, as if they'd known each other forever. Feeding a ghost-type Pokémon was still tricky. The nutrient blocks could keep them alive, but they lacked the vital life force the ghost types needed. Otani looked over at Venusaur, thought for a moment, then asked him to gather a small sphere of natural energy. He called Beicha forward. Before Otani could say a word, Beicha's eager eyes told him he'd guessed right. The original cube had taught Venusaur about the cycle of life, and the energy he drew carried that living essence with it. That meant the biggest problem was solved. Otani watched as Beicha took a few huge gulps of the energy sphere, then went silent, belched, and slowly floated down onto the table, clearly a little full. Less than a fifth of the sphere had been consumed. He checked Venusaur for any sign of strain, and finding none, let out a relieved breath. That afternoon, the director of the welfare home brought the children to Otani's farm for some hands-on experience. Otani put them to work pulling up radishes. "Mother Melissa, I want to be a trainer as good as Brother Otani when I grow up," Xiaowu shouted eagerly to Melissa. Melissa relaxed and crouched down, patting Xiaowu's head. "Can you tell Mom why?" "If I were as strong as Brother Otani, I could protect everyone. Protect you, Melissa," Xiaowu answered. Otani smiled encouragingly. "Then you'll have to work hard, Xiaowu, but what you need most right now is to grow up quickly." "Yeah, I'll work hard. I want my own Butterfree army, just like Brother Otani," Xiaowu declared loudly. Dagu, who had been taking a sip of water, choked and spat it out. Melissa looked embarrassed, but quickly grabbed a handkerchief and handed it to Otani. He took it with a bemused half-smile, and instead of using it, wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "Xiaowu," Otani said, curious, "why do you think that?" "Because I'm really powerful," Xiaowu said matter-of-factly. "If I have that many Butterfree, nobody will dare bully me." Otani paused. The image stuck with him, hundreds of Butterfree, all using Fierce Wind at once. If all of them attacked together, the force would be terrifying. He realized he had long overlooked the combat potential of Butterfree, but the thought chilled him. That kind of coordinated use shouldn't happen. The Alliance maintains strict rules. Farmers' Pokémon aren't supposed to attack at will unless there's a real need. If the Alliance caught them, they'd be hit with heavy fines, except in cases of legitimate self-defense. That evening, with the children from the welfare home helping, every last radish in the field was harvested. To thank them, Otani baked a large batch of little cookies. The children took them with bright smiles, clasped hands, and followed Melissa back to the home. Otani had wanted to invite them to stay for dinner, but Issa declined. "Auntie's almost finished with the meal," she said, so he let it go. He waved the children off and finished the remaining work with Meow Meow and the others. After they ate, Meow Meow and the two others approached Otani with awkward expressions. "Mr. Otani," Musashi began, "we have to leave. The leader assigned us a new mission." Otani froze for a moment. A dull ache settled in his chest. He'd grown used to their company over the long weeks they'd spent together, and he liked these three a great deal. He had even thought about asking them to stay longer, but they'd always refused. He hadn't expected the time to say goodbye to come so soon. "We'll miss you, Meow." Meowth's eyes were wet. His time on the farm had been the happiest he could remember. "Thank you for taking care of me," he repeated, voice breaking. Otani gave a soft sigh. "When are you leaving?" Tonight. Otani hesitated. Can you tell me why you're leaving? The three of them fell silent. Otani didn't press it. They packed up a few snacks that had been prepared for their trip, pulled their Team Rocket uniforms back on, and under the cover of night, slipped away from the farm. Otani watched the direction they'd gone until they vanished, puzzled and wondering about their reasons. The next morning, the place felt emptier without the trio's raucous energy. Without them around, Otani found the work a little duller, and the chores took longer, so he told Bulbasaur and the others to pause their training and help with the farm work. That afternoon, someone finally arrived in response to the help-wanted notice Otani had posted. When he heard what the housekeeper's sister said, he was taken aback and hurried to straighten up. He noticed a young man with long hair standing in the yard, staring up at the Butterfree as it drifted across the sky. The man watched it with an odd intensity, then let out a small, enthusiastic song. "Oh, what a beautiful sight! It makes me want to sing, la la la." The singing was earnest but painfully off-key. Otani's face twitched. He couldn't stand music that badly. He cleared his throat loudly a few times, trying to think of a polite way to turn the fellow away. The young man didn't seem embarrassed at all. He stepped forward and introduced himself with a respectful bow. "Hello, sir. I'm Richard. I come from a musical family. My dream is to be a great rock singer, and I'm working hard toward that goal every day." Richard's manners were so sincere that Otani found it awkward to be blunt. He tried to soften the refusal. "Mr. Richard, I'm sorry. I'm afraid you might not be exactly what I'm looking for." Almost immediately, Richard's face fell. He looked crushed, then bitterly dramatic. "No, my journey as a musician ends here," he said, and began to walk away from the farm, one slow step after another. Otani watched him go for a moment, then reached up to touch his chin and called after him. Richard paused and turned, surprised. "Sir, have you changed your mind?" Otani studied the young man's retreating figure, then asked, surprising even himself. "Richard, did you ever sing bel canto? Were you trained in classical singing?" The question hung between them, unexpected, as Richard blinked and tried to hide a flicker of confusion and something like regret. When Richard heard that, his face went blank for a moment, then he nodded. "I don't mean anything rude," he added quickly. "I just want you to sing it again for me, without holding back your beautiful voice." Otani was silent a heartbeat, then he nodded. As if by muscle memory, he straightened, drew a careful breath, and sang. His clear tenor filled the farmhouse like sunlight, and everyone fell quiet. When the song finished, applause broke out, and Otani gave a polite bow. Richard clapped enthusiastically. "I have a small suggestion," he said. "Bel canto and rock aren't incompatible. They can be combined." In his previous life, Otani had lived through an information age and heard every kind of music. The idea of mixing operatic bel canto with rock thrilled him, the most famous example being Vitus's The Fifth Element. Without hesitating, Otani sang again, this time threading a rockier edge through his classical phrasing. Richard's eyes widened. He could hardly contain himself. "Wonderful. So powerful. So thrilling. This is exactly the direction I've been searching for. Thank you, Mr. Otani." He leaned forward, excited. "I'll hire you as the house singer at the bar. Start at 8 each evening, finish at 10. Will that work for you? The pay will be good." Richard left the farm, thanking them over and over. Otani watched him go. Richard was polite and well-mannered, but his clothes were clearly worn and a little ragged, the kind of shabby finery a runaway young master might wear when he'd bolted from home to chase a dream. Otani shook his head but didn't pry. He was only helping for the night. Whether Richard made a name for himself would be up to him. That evening, Richard returned to the farm bar with his Pokémon. A small, cricket-like Pokémon that sounded like a loudspeaker, and a huge, drum-beating gorilla Pokémon that made the room tremble. The punchy drum beats and a sweet, violin-like melody blended in an unexpectedly pleasing way. Richard had clearly taken Otani's advice to heart, mixing classical violin lines with raw rock drums. He'd been tinkering, and it showed. The other patrons and their Pokémon applauded, and for the first time Richard felt recognized. He sang with even more passion. When the bar closed at 10, Otani handed Richard his pay. Richard accepted it carefully, pressed it to his chest, and left with a bright, grateful smile. "Boomstick? Galar region?" Otani thought to himself, as he watched them walk away. That was a long journey. He smiled, closed the bar door, and locked up for the night. Chapter 133. Entering Tianguan Mountain. Word spread fast that the bar had a resident singer. Today, even the town's windy dog, Windspeed, had come along with Miss Junsha to see for themselves. "Mr. Otani, you actually opened a bar for Pokémon?" Miss Junsha asked, amused. Otani smiled and prepared the drinks. He served Miss Junsha the house recommendation and poured a glass of spiced cherry wine into a shallow bowl for Windspeed. The dog licked cautiously at first. The wine hit him with a sharp, spicy kick, but it brightened him up immediately. In a few eager gulps he finished it, and little flickers of flame danced at the corners of his mouth. Then he looked at Miss Junsha expectantly, asking for another round. "Windspeed, don't drink too much," Miss Junsha warned, half serious. "You still have to patrol tomorrow. It's not good to be drunk." Still, she laughed and ordered another bowl for him. Inside the bar, Richard sang softly, exactly the kind of gentle, occasional performance Otani had asked for. This place was meant for relaxation, not pyrotechnics, after all. Larulas had come along too. Otani had put him to work as a waiter, and now he flitted from table to table, taking orders and serving drinks to the guests. It could be considered a kind of exercise, and Larulas was taking it very seriously. In Black Gold City, Frost Milk Fairy was stretched out on a pile of abandoned rubble that the team had converted into a makeshift resting spot. Someone had laid out a number of soft mats on top of the debris, worn around the edges, but clearly cleaned and maintained on a regular basis. The little patch of comfort looked incongruous against the surrounding detritus. Under the pile, several Pokémon knelt with bruised faces and bleeding noses, a Dongshi cat and a handful of Meow cats. When Frost Milk Fairy and her group first arrived in the city, those ruffians had tried to mug them. They'd been stopped, and their secret hideout had been appropriated by the adventuring team as a temporary base. Frost Milk Fairy hadn't wanted to make things harder for them than necessary. Life was already tough for wild Pokémon scraping by in the city, and she'd taken a lenient approach. Now, with the kneeling cats patched up and under watch, she lay back on the mats and mapped out the team's next itinerary. Without warning, something struck her face. A Pokémon fell from the sky and landed on top of her, clutching a battered backpack in its jaws. It was Mukiying, the courier who'd taken a commission from Otani Farm. He scrambled to his feet, embarrassed and coughing up dust, while Frost Milk Fairy blinked through the shock and reached for the bag. McEagle tossed the backpack to Blue Jay and then collapsed to the ground, panting with his tongue lolling out, not caring about how he looked. He'd followed leads and asked for directions until he finally found Black Gold City, but he was completely exhausted. Muck! When Frosty Milk Fairy heard that the bag held things Otani had prepared for them, her eyes lit up. Mama! They opened the backpack, and a pleasant aroma spilled out. Otani's homemade snacks. Tucked inside was a letter. In it, Otani wrote about how things were going on the farm, and told them that if they ever felt tired, they could come back anytime. He would always be there. Frosty Milk Fairy's eyes filled with tears. She practically devoured the cookies in big bites. Mew and Celebi came over and happily joined in. They also found warm scarves Otani had made. All were the same bright red, each with its own embroidered pattern. Otani had hand-woven them from the finest silk thread supplied by Butterfly, and they were incredibly warm. One by one, the Pokémon wrapped the scarves around their necks and broke into wide, grateful smiles. Dongshi Meow and the others stared at Frost Milk Fairy with envy, seeing that Frost Milk Fairy generously handed out the cookies Otani had made. Dongshi Meow and the other cats ate them with tears in their eyes. They were that good. Thanks to the supplies Otani had prepared, the party saved a lot of time. So Frost Milk Fairy decided to head into the outskirts of Tianguan Mountain ahead of schedule. Before they left, she rolled her eyes, then grinned at Dongshi Meow. "Want to go someplace where you can eat snacks like this every day? After we come back from Tianguan Mountain, I'll go once more and bring you along." Dongshi Meow didn't hesitate for a second. Who would turn down the chance to eat such delicious cookies every day? The team entered the Tianguan Mountains from the Heijin City entrance. The whole range was blanketed in snow. The higher they climbed, the colder it became, but they were only exploring the outer areas. With the special scarves Otani had made, the cold was bearable. Many Pokémon lived in these outer reaches too, watching the newcomers with curious eyes. The team was still relatively inexperienced, so Frostmilk made a point of using diplomacy to win the local Pokémon over. She asked them where on Tianguan Mountain there might be places worth exploring, and after getting a general lay of the land, the group officially moved into the mountain's interior. The passages inside the mountain were a maze. Without the local Pokémon leading the way, they would have been lost within minutes. The guide led them smoothly through narrow tunnels and caverns until they reached the mouth of a huge cave. There, the lead Pokémon planted itself and refused to go any farther. It warned them that the path ahead was dangerous and urged the team to turn back. Frostmilk wanted to push on and take a look, but as team leader, she couldn't risk the safety of her teammates. She was about to call the retreat when she realized Mew and Celebi were missing. Turning back, she spotted the two little ones playing inside the cave, oblivious to the warning. A chill ran up Frostmilk's spine. She was about to call them out when a deafening roar shook the cavern. A massive, electric-type beast stormed out of the cave, bristling with anger. It planted its feet and stared them down. This was clearly its territory. The electric beast struck without warning, unleashing a 100,000-volt beam straight at the adventuring party. Frosty Milkmare twisted out of the way just in time and whipped around, but the Pokémon that had been leading them was gone. Inside the cave, the furious electric beast was relentlessly attacking Mew and Celebi. Despite its raw power, it was up against two legendary Pokémon. Every strike was deftly evaded. Each thunderous blast echoed so loudly that nearby Pokémon instinctively kept their distance to avoid being caught in the crossfire. The electric beast hammered away until it finally ran out of energy and slumped to the ground, panting and sullen as it tried to recover. Cautiously, Frostmilk Fairy stepped forward with a small offering, cream and biscuits, and presented them to the exhausted electric beast. It sniffed the food, began to drool, and accepted the treat gratefully. After devouring the snack in one bite, it immediately found the intruders considerably more appealing. Frostmilk Fairy's cream does boost a Pokémon's favorability, but its effect is limited, especially against stronger opponents, where the increase in affection is noticeably smaller. One favor led to another. After the electric beast accepted the first pieces of cream and biscuits from the Frostmilk Fairy, he happily ate several more. They were now so friendly that they might as well be sworn brothers, practically calling each other Big Brother and Little Brother. Frostmilk Fairy had been around long enough to be an expert at dealing with others. She knew how to say the right thing to the right creature. In a matter of seconds, she had coaxed out everything the electric beast knew. It turned out Mount Tianguan was divided into levels and territories. The electric beast ruled the outer reaches of the labyrinth there. A lone wolf, his domain was small, just large enough for him to scrape by. Frostmilk Fairy rolled her eyes and repeated to the electric beast the very offer she'd made to Dongshi Miao earlier. He was touched by her generosity, but he declined politely. He wasn't used to being tied down. Even if he had to give up such delicious snacks, he valued his freedom too much to trade it away. Frost Fairy felt a twinge of regret, but she let the matter drop and shifted her focus back to gathering information about what was going on inside the maze. Chapter 134, Hunter J. That night, the expedition rested safely in the electric beast's territory, sheltering in its cave. At dawn, the electric beast himself led the group partway down the path and stopped at the edge of his domain. To avoid needless losses, electric beasts habitually refuse to fight opponents of equal strength, a rule of survival in the wild. If both sides take heavy damage, a third party can easily take advantage. With a crackle of electricity, the beast gave a brief farewell and turned back to hunt for his breakfast. The team continued deeper into the caverns. Along the way, the electric beast introduced them to several other leaders who controlled neighboring pockets of the territory. Some were easy to talk to, others guarded their borders with rigid territoriality. When one of the dream demons heard that Frostmilk Fairy and the others were setting off on an adventure, his eyes shone with envy. Frost Milk Fairy rolled her eyes and launched into a breathless description of how wonderful the world outside was. The Dream Demon listened, mesmerized. He had spent his whole life in that place and had never once left. I had never been out before. The world beyond my territory was a thing I only dared imagine. The longing to see it finally overcame me. Persuaded by the Frost Milk Fairy, the naive Dream Demon agreed to join an adventure team. She packed her few belongings casually, more excited than afraid, and set off deeper into the maze with the others. The team treated every discovery as treasure. Whenever they found a strange or beautiful stone, they would slip it carefully into their packs, small spoils of the journey. For the Dream Demon, the maze was new in a way she had never experienced. She had lived alone ever since her parents left. She had been afraid to travel far for fear of losing the territory she'd claimed. Now, walking among companions, she felt those old fears easing with each step. They pressed on, meeting oddities and wonders at every turn, but nothing truly dangerous. The maze revealed curious plants, glittering caverns, and hidden nooks, and the Dream Demon took it all in with childlike awe. Far away in Sinnoh, tucked into the woods, a different kind of hunt was underway. The famous hunter Jay sat in his spaceship studying a bounty transmitted by the Galaxy team. The target, the three gods of Lake Sinnoh, Akonome, Uxie, and Emrido. Among the lake gods were three. Akonam, the god of will, who dwelt in a cave on a small island at the center of Ligi Lake. Uxie, the god of wisdom, who lived in the Lake of Wisdom. And Emrido, the god of emotion, who lived in Lake Heart. Legend said they were created by Arceus, the god of creation, and embodied the bond between humans and Pokémon. Uxie bestowed wisdom on people, Emrido taught them emotion, and Akonum gave them will. They lay sleeping on the lake bottoms, keeping the balance of the world. Sinnoh lore also assigned each god a dangerous ability. Uxie could erase the memories of anyone who met its gaze. Emrido could strip all emotion from a creature that came into contact with it, and Akonum could immobilize any being that harmed it. Jay had learned all of that, but she didn't care why Team Galaxy wanted to capture the three sacred mushrooms alive. What mattered to her was the bounty Team Galaxy was offering. 50 billion Alliance coins. The number hung in the air like a promise. If she finished this job, she could retire, vanish into seclusion, and never work another day. Hunter Jay accepted the long-standing bounty without hesitation. News of the contract sent ripples through the black market. Some people were stunned. Others watched with indifferent curiosity. None of it mattered to Jay. She'd come this far on the back of her strength and her record of getting the job done for her employer. The next day, she passed the details and the rendezvous point to the Galaxy team. They left the deposit as agreed and set out. Hunter Jay led her crew to the rendezvous in their ship and headed straight for Ligi Lake. The ship hovered over the water. Her Hunter team deployed, and the operatives the Galaxy team had sent to assist were standing by. Both sides coordinated closely to make sure nothing went wrong. By the end of the day, thanks to her superior strength and the team's advanced petrification rays, Hunter Jay had captured the three sacred mushrooms. At the meeting point on the lake shore, the Galaxy team's contact broke into applause and, smiling, said, "Outstanding work. Everything looks perfect." As expected of Hunter Jay, never defeated, their speed and strength were terrifying. Hunter Jay regarded Team Galaxy with a cold, arrogant stare and said nothing. The Galaxy team's contact stayed calm and promptly paid the remaining balance. When the exchange was finished, Hunter Jay turned and boarded their ship. Team Galaxy's members stood on the shoreline, watching in silence as the engines wound up and the craft prepared to depart. Then, without warning, a bolt of lightning streaked down from the sky and struck the ship's engine. The vessel shuddered and faltered, then plunged toward Ligi Lake. Inside, Hunter Jay's arrogant expression vanished. For a moment they hesitated, weighing whether to abandon ship, but that single instant cost them their last chance. The craft hit the water and erupted in a thunderous explosion. Hunter Jay vanished in the blast. Whether the famed hunter survived was unknown. The Galaxy team watched the destruction with an almost clinical indifference, then turned and left Ligi Lake in disciplined formation. Hunter Jay's ship had been ambushed because Team Galactic had set a trap. Yukihi and Akonome possessed a precognitive ability, and Team Galactic had exploited that, something Hunter J never realized. One small intelligence error was all it took. She paid for it with her life. Team Galactic returned to headquarters with the 3 sacred mushrooms and handed them over to Pluto for disposal. Using specialized instruments, Pluto drew the mushroom's energy out. The power congealed slowly until it formed a single red chain. Chi-Ri stared at the chain with hungry, obsessed eyes. His plan could finally move from theory to action. He was only a few steps away from making his wish a reality. Hades chuckled beside him, and the two of them shared a cold, quiet laugh. A conspiracy that would soon engulf all of Sinnoh was taking shape. Deep inside Tianguan Mountain, the adventure team was running for their lives. They had wandered into a Zubat clan's territory by mistake and were now being assaulted by furious Zubat and their kin. In those circumstances, Frostmilk Fairy's diplomatic charms were useless. Fortunately, Dream Demon, already familiar with the mountain's twists and hollows, knew how to keep them alive. They slipped into a narrow crevice and hid, avoiding the Zubat's searching and attacks. What the team didn't know was that it was actually Charmander who, using his special power, had lured the Zubat away. Otherwise, the Zubat's ultrasonic echolocation would have picked them up long ago. Exhausted, Frostmilk Fairy ignored everything else and collapsed to the ground, panting to catch her breath. Mew and Celebi remained unmoved. The whole incident had been caused by Mew. If she hadn't gone off to tease a Zubat, the team would have passed through the territory unnoticed. Frostmilk Fairy was worn out and decided it wasn't worth pressing on. "Forget it. Let's head back to the farm and rest first," she said. After a good rest, she retraced their route to Black Gold City, gathered Dongxi Miao and the others, and set off for the farm. Chapter 135, Winter Tea Party. The Sinnoh region reacted quickly to the disappearance of the 3 Lake Guardians, launching a region-wide investigation. The search ground to a halt, however, when Hunter J vanished and no new clues surfaced. At the same time, Team Galactic finally made its presence known. In Dr. Yamanashi's laboratory in Masaga Town, Dr. Yamanashi studied the reports in his hands with a worried expression. He had invited Professor Mustard Orchid as an expert in Pokémon history research. "Dr. Mustard," Dr. Yamanashi said, "what do you make of Team Galactic capturing the 3 gods of the lake?" Professor Mustard Orchid remained calm. Uknam, Uxie, and Emrido, the 3 lake gods, are said in legend to have been created by the god of creation. Their powers are documented as erasing memories, removing emotions, and controlling other beings. If Team Galactic manages to harness those abilities, the consequences could be catastrophic. And now that the Guardians have disappeared after being captured, there's only one plausible conclusion. Team Galactic has a far darker plan. Their ultimate goal may be to destabilize or even subvert the entire Sinnoh region. After Dr. Mustard finished speaking, the laboratory fell into a heavy silence as everyone absorbed the implication. Dr. Yamanashi's jaw tightened. Outside, snow drifted down over Masaga Town, quiet and deceptively peaceful. When Mustard Orchid finished speaking, the calm mask he usually wore faltered for the first time. Worry creased his face. "Our intelligence is still far too thin," he said. "They operate in the dark while we're exposed. We're being reactive, not proactive." Dr. Yamanashi breathed out a long sigh. The legends of Sinnoh were so ancient that much of the history couldn't be verified. Many stories had been passed down orally, and it was impossible to tell where truth ended and myth began. Even a historian of Professor Mustard's stature couldn't claim a complete understanding of Sinnoh's past, much less deduce Team Galactic's next move from the few scraps of evidence they had. For now, the region had resorted to the simplest, bluntest countermeasure: tighter surveillance and direct control over its ancient relics. Crude as it was, it worked. The Sinnoh League's imposition of martial measures had frustrated Team Galactic's plans and forced them to back off, at least temporarily. Chi-Ri, however, showed no sign of panic. He was confident Sinnoh couldn't hold this posture forever. As soon as the Alliance let its guard down, he'd make his move. The mood here was taut and suspicious, every shadow a potential threat. Far away in Kanto, though, at Otani Farm, people were blissfully unaware, enjoying themselves as if nothing were wrong. Otani decided to reward himself for a year of hard work. He planned a winter, self-serve tea party on the farm, several days of preparation, a long shopping list, and heaps of ingredients. After all, there were a lot of Pokémon to feed. He invited many friends to join. On the day of the party, platters of food were piled high and drinks were laid out for anyone to help themselves. Nothing was especially rare or precious, but everything had been made by Otani, and it tasted wonderful. The aroma drew in a number of wild Pokémon. Otani didn't shoo them away. He welcomed every guest, human and Pokémon alike. The children from the welfare home and Xiaofei were running around the yard, getting into the sort of harmless trouble that comes with sugar and friendship. Otani, Macaulay, and Watari sat a little apart, leaning against a hay bale and chatting quietly. "It's a pity Sirona didn't come," Du remarked with a certain smugness. "It's not often Otani puts on something this generous, and she missed it." "What happened in Sinnoh?" Otani asked, curious. Macaulay didn't hesitate. It wasn't a secret among the league leaders, and Otani wasn't an outsider, so he spoke plainly. "There's been a string of disturbances up in Sinnoh, sightings and incidents that need investigating. Sirona stayed behind to deal with it. It's said the 3 gods of the lake were captured by Team Galaxy. They're keeping everyone busy." Macaulay sighed and shoveled another big bite of cake into his mouth. "Team Galaxy? That's what people are calling them. An evil organization. No one's sure what they want with the 3 lake gods." "They're not easy to handle," Du said, tearing into his steak. "We just finished the whole Team Rocket mess, and now Team Galaxy shows up. It never ends." Otani chewed slowly, the news settling in. He'd been tracking Team Galaxy's moves in Sinnoh for a while. Their leader, Chiri, had been shown to capture the 3 sacred spirits, supposedly to create some kind of red chain to control them. There were rumors about a gun key hidden in the random ruins and a white jade orb from Shenhei Town. The broad strokes were familiar, the details were the problem. How to tell Sharona? Otani thought. Should he go to her in person? It seemed the only sensible option. Otherwise, how could he explain that he knew so many of these secret legends? He tightened his jaw. With his current strength, he could protect himself. If push came to shove, he could lay his cards on the table when the time came. Whether you believe it or not is up to Sirona herself. Today's tea party had gone off without a hitch. Everyone enjoyed the food, and the event stretched through the whole day. In the afternoon, there were games and entertainment, and Otani had mixed a variety of wines for the guests. The children, of course, had juice. By evening, the guests had gone, leaving the yard in a mess. Otani rounded up all the Pokémon on the farm and had them settled in half an hour. He was exhausted, but in a good mood. The place hadn't felt this lively in a long time. He kept cleaning until late into the night and finally finished. Then, suddenly, a group of Pokémon appeared in the yard. Otani leaned out the window and a pink figure leapt up and smothered his face in a hug. He fumbled to peel it away and found it was Menghuan. Meow! Menghuan beamed up at him. Wasn't that more fun than usual? Celebi fluttered over, puzzled. Huh? Why are you back already? Frost Milk Fairy wore an expression that was difficult to read. Mama. A small voice drifted through the living room. Otani sat there with a long, suffering look as the Frost Fairy continued to complain. There was nothing he could do. Menghuan was exactly the sort of creature who caused trouble wherever she went. So what's all this about these Pokémon? He asked, glancing out at the yard. A messy congregation of Pokémon were happily eating outside. Charmander gave a helpless little shrug, then shifted back into his Mewtwo form and flopped onto the sofa. He began to recount, with mock gravitas, the Frost Fairy's great achievements. They'd been traveling quietly enough, he said, until Menghuan, kept swooping in every time she saw a Pokémon she fancied and bringing it along. The party grew and grew. Mewtwo finally lost his patience and used his psychic power to fly straight back to the farm so they wouldn't pick up any more strays. Otherwise, who knew how many they'd have by the time they arrived? Among the newcomers were Farfetch'd, a Bulbasaur, 2 Meowths, a drowsy-looking Drowsy, and even a Togepi. Otani blinked at the little egg Pokémon. Togepi noticed him watching and chirped, Chabi Chabi! Ah, hello Togepi, Otani said, smiling despite himself. Togepi truly was a lucky little Pokémon. They say whoever owns a Togepi will have good luck. Otani looked at Frost Milk Fairy. The little thing puffed out his chest, waiting for Otani's praise. You're amazing, Frost Milk Fairy. You really are. Otani said with a smile, reaching out to pat his head. Frost Milk Fairy went suddenly shy. "Mama, Mama," he whispered. "I'm no match for you, heh," he added under his breath. No one noticed, though, that when Togepi turned away and shifted to a hidden angle where no one could see his face, his expression went downright wicked for a moment. He snapped it back to normal almost instantly and began eating as if nothing had happened. Chapter 136. So many strange things. Otani was jolted awake by a piercing scream and sprang out of bed. Downstairs, the housekeeper stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the living room in disbelief. Overnight, the entire room had been wrecked. Furniture overturned, cushions shredded, ornaments scattered into shards. A thief was the first thing Otani thought of, but the farm was heavily guarded. Whoever had done this would have been discovered long before they could make such a mess. Still clutching Togepi, he hurried down to inspect the damage. Mewtwo was already there, watching Topi and Otani's arms with an inscrutable expression. Togepi, for its part, blinked innocently up at Mewtwo. They did a quick inventory. Luckily, the losses weren't catastrophic. Most of the damage was cosmetic. The one real casualty was Otani's favorite tea set, utterly smashed. He gathered the broken pieces carefully, planning to see if anyone could repair them. Otani stood for a long moment, thoughtful but not acting rashly. After they finished cleaning up, the house slowly returned to normal, and he went on with the day's tasks. The morning's mystery left him unsettled, though, and as he set about work, he found himself missing the predictable rhythm of the seasons, something he hadn't realized he'd taken for granted. On the bright side, at least he didn't have to labor through a bitter winter here. He only wished he could change that constant, evergreen field outside, making the season's return felt out of reach. Without the flower field, feeding Butterfree and the others would cost a fortune. Otani sighed and went back to work. For the next few days, there was no more damage to the property, and he began to relax until this morning. After breakfast, all the Pokémon began showing various degrees of discomfort. Otani immediately moved to take emergency measures. He couldn't risk a widespread problem. His main team were all right. Their strength kept the symptoms minimal, but the unrest among the other Pokémon was bad enough that he couldn't ignore it. There was no point suspecting his longtime partners, so his attention turned to the newcomers. Mewtwo sat serenely at the table, sipping tea as if nothing were wrong. Ibrahimovic was the first to stand, fixating on the little Togepi curled in Otani's arms. "Chappie," he said, voice tight. Togepi blinked at Eevee with an innocent, open face, as if asking what the fuss was about. Every head turned to the small Pokémon. Togepi shrank back and began to tremble, tears welling in those big eyes. Otani frowned. A memory nudged at him. An episode from the animated series about a particularly mischievous, squall, even malevolent Togepi that had tormented a trio of trainers. The thought made him uneasy. Could this Togepi be the cause of the disturbance? He couldn't tell yet, but whatever was happening, it was serious enough that he needed to find out quickly. Otani's ability to sense malice gave no warning this time. Togepi's disguise had been that good. When it could no longer keep up the act, Togepi simply stopped pretending. It hopped out of Otani's arms, planted itself on the table, and contorted its normally cheerful face into something utterly sinister. Anyone who knew Togepi as a symbol of luck and happiness would have been shocked to see that expression. "Chappie! Chappie!" Togepi crowed with an evil grin, in its own garbled way declaring, "Now that I've been found out, I'm done hiding. It was me all along." "Bebe! Bebe!" Huabebe snapped, demanding angrily why Togepi had done this. Togepi snorted in disdain and repeated, "Chappie, Chappie," more insistently. Otani felt a chill. It suddenly made sense. Togepi hadn't been trying to manipulate the farm directly. It had been using Otani. If Togepi could seize control of Otani, it would effectively control the whole farm, because Otani was the center of authority here. Originally, Togepi had planned to erode the farm's power slowly, taking its time. Now that it had been exposed, patience was no longer an option. It dropped the pretense and moved Cup to seize control openly. No matter how much he'd planned, Otani hadn't expected a Darkrai to be hiding in his shadow. The close-range strike was stopped outright when the shadowy figure intercepted it. Seeing that, the other Pokémon held back. "Chappie?" Togepi's confused chirp cut through the air. Otani relaxed his grip and signaled Darkrai to lower its guard, then sighed. Mewtwo, can you change his personality? Mewtwo set his teacup down with the same calm detachment he always wore. It won't help, he said. This is how he's made. Even if you alter him now, he'll revert later. All the while, Togepi hung in the air, trapped under Eevee's psychic influence, struggling to break free. Otani's sigh deepened. He wasn't happy about it. Togepi was precious to him, but this had crossed a line he couldn't ignore. He called Miss Junsha. She arrived quickly, and after hearing the whole story, looked thoroughly shocked. They put special restraints on Togepi and escorted him off the farm. Otani didn't intend to get involved further. He was done dealing with the fallout. In the world of Pokémon, creatures that show serious malice toward humans are rarely given second chances. Ones like that, Togepi, are usually locked away for life. In extreme cases, they're even put down. Otani never imagined it would come to that. He certainly didn't expect what happened a few days later, when word spread that the Togepi had escaped from custody. The Alliance issued a public warning. A dangerous, malicious Togepi was on the loose, and people should take care. At first, few paid it any mind. That changed after one trainer was frightened by the little Pokémon. Then others began to take the notices seriously. Togepi's rare appearance in the wild worked against it. Most trainers who saw it deliberately avoided it, which infuriated the Togepi more than anything. For a mischievous Pokémon, being avoided was worse than being hungry. It couldn't play tricks if no one came near. Frustrated and desperate to feel something other than scorn, the Togepi left Kanto and slipped toward Johto. Frost Fairy blamed herself for a long time after the escape, certain she should have done something to prevent it. Otani soothed her, though. Who could have predicted that such an adorable little Togepi would turn out to be a murderer, and alarmingly, utterly malevolent? Early warnings and reminders had been sent out across Johto, and they worked. Trainers were forewarned and avoided being tricked or hurt while they were traveling. Otani felt a little pang of regret that Togepi was gone, but it wasn't a heavy one. Togepi was mischievous. He wouldn't kill anyone, just cause trouble and make people suffer. And Otani didn't believe there had been any real danger. His mind was already elsewhere, the vine Pokémon. Supplying rations for Pokémon was a huge ongoing cost, and Otani wondered if he could cut that expense by producing food himself. The more he thought about it, the more practical the idea became. If he could grow the raw materials, he could be self-sufficient and save a lot of money. He asked the vine monster's permission, harvested a piece of vine, and set to work experimenting with making Pokémon rations. The prototypes didn't differ much in quality from the commercial packets on the market. That was encouraging. The only thing holding him back now was the amount of raw material he could get. There was a simple solution: Venusaur. With its strength and plant-based abilities, Venusaur could speed the vine Pokémon's growth without harming it. Confident in the plan, Otani went to find the vine monster and lay out his proposal. Chapter 137, Pokémon Rations Development. The vines weren't a problem in themselves. They kept growing faster by the day. A vine monster's vines behaved much like human hair. They continue to grow after being cut. With enough nutrition, they just keep on lengthening, and cutting them often made them grow back better. In fact, the best vines could even be used as a spice, cool and juicy in the mouth with a faint minty tang. Bulbasaur gathered a ball of natural energy and offered it to the vine monster. Bar, bar, bar! The vine monster gulped the energy down in one swallow. Immediately, the vines along its body burst into wild growth. Ah, that's perfect, it seemed to sigh. Otani scrambled back outside the reach of the whipping vines, wary of getting tangled. The vine monster was in trouble too. So many new tendrils had sprouted that it had wrapped itself up. Bar, bar, bar! It looked pleadingly at Otani for help. Otani took out a pair of scissors, snipped through the excess vines with a few quick cuts, and freed the creature from its own overgrown foliage. Bar, bar, bar! The vine monster hopped down, danced around happily, and flicked a few trimmed tendrils. Otani watched it for a moment, then asked with concern, "Are you all right?" Bar, bar, bar! Bulbasaur chattered, smiling and nodding. Seeing the little vine Pokémon was fine, Otani breathed easier and sent it off to help carry the harvested vines to the kitchen. Back in the kitchen, he set to work processing the plants. First, he squeezed out the juice, then collected the remaining starch and kneaded it into a dough ball before feeding it into the machine. After the usual sequence of steps, he had a batch of the most basic Pokémon rations. Otani tried one. It was bland, serviceable for filling a stomach, but nothing special. He made a mental note to tailor the recipe to the tastes of the Pokémon on the farm. He repeated the process, this time folding concentrated tree fruit jam into the dough while kneading. Then he ran it through the noodle press to cut it into small pieces and spread them on a baking tray. He slid the tray into the oven and set it to medium-high. 15 minutes later, the timer dinged, and the rations were done. Otani put on gloves, pulled the tray out, and tasted another piece. Much better, fruity and fragrant, and easier to eat. Still, there was a definite gap between his homemade rations and the commercial stuff sold in stores. Otani began the trials again and again. Every test batch he made was sampled by the farm's Snorlax, which meant nothing went to waste. After several days of tinkering, he finally hit on the right formula. The rations now tasted almost identical to the commercial products, but because the ingredients and process cost him next to nothing, he could sell them far cheaper. He decided to package the food in 2-kilogram bags and sell them at 5 Alliance coins a bag in his own breeding house. At that price and quality, it undercut every Pokémon food brand on the market. There was no point trying to scale production, though. The rations relied on the condensed natural energy his Venusaur produced, and overusing that energy would be harmful to the Pokémon. Expanding output would exhaust Venusaur and put its health at risk. For now, the supply was more than enough to feed Otani Farm, and any surplus could be sold through the nursery. But one Venusaur wouldn't be enough if he wanted to meet larger demand. A single vine monster couldn't keep up. It would make a big difference if another could evolve into a full-grown Venusaur. To trigger that evolution, the vine Pokémon would need to learn the move Primitive Power. That was easy enough to arrange. He could just buy a skill CD, but whether the Pokémon would accept the lesson was another question. Otani tracked down the vine Pokémon and asked its permission. The vine creature agreed without hesitation. The next day, the skill disc arrived. Otani fitted the learning module to the vine Pokémon, and on the first attempt, it successfully learned the Primitive Power. Bulbasaur then produced another orb of natural energy and offered it to the vine Pokémon. The creature swallowed it in one gulp, light flared around it, and when the glow faded, the vine Pokémon had evolved into a giant vine beast. It gave a deep, satisfied bellow. Otani inspected it carefully. There were no problems, no side effects, and no risk of overdosing. The newly evolved giant vine Pokémon wrapped its vines around Otani in a grateful hug and thanked him for helping it evolve smoothly. To repay him, it began growing vines like crazy. Vines unfurled in thick bundles, one after another, and the creature showed no sign of tiring. Otani stared, stunned. It was frighteningly strong. "Venusaur, is your natural energy really that powerful? Could you spare one for me?" he asked. Bulbasaur handed Otani an orb too. Otani swallowed it and felt only a warm flush through his body. Nothing dramatic. Then it hit him. The real problem wasn't the skill disc or the orbs. It was the giant vine Pokémon. Otani realized something important. The giant vine monster must have a hidden regenerative ability. That was huge, a potentially endless source of vines. The creature produced a heap of thick vines, each taller than the farmhouse, and then carefully helped Otani bundle them up. Afterward, it flopped down in the sun to soak up warmth and restore its strength. Its goodwill was admirable, but the pile was ridiculous. How long would it take to process all of this? Otani wiped his hands and called out, "Thanks so much, Gromit." "Bari, Bari," the vine monster replied cheerfully, patting its chest to show it was perfectly fine. If needed, it could grow more. No, that's more than enough for now," Otani said quickly. He already had a feeling he'd need one more machine dedicated to making Pokémon food. Between the giant spawn's output and Bulbasaur's energy ball boosting growth, the supply of vines was basically unlimited. Even if he didn't want to go into mass production, they'd effectively been mass-produced for him. The next day, a Pokémon feed processor arrived at the farm. There was plenty of room in the kitchen, so Otani set the new machine up there, and they got to work turning the vines into feed. The machines had made everything so much easier. Otani just needed to load them and set the fruit mix ratios. It took him a day to prepare the entire supply of Pokémon food. They had only ordered enough ingredients to cover the farm's needs for a while. The rest of the finished food he sent to the nursery to sell. The response was excellent. Word spread quickly that Otani Breeding House offered high-quality Pokémon food at low prices, and customers came in droves. So many people showed up that Otani had to limit how much each customer could buy, which helped keep the crowds manageable. The new sales eased the farm's immediate problems. Daily feeding costs dropped, and Otani decided to put those savings aside for now. That didn't mean everything was fixed. The farm still needed more renovation, and Otani began to daydream about expanding the herd. Now that there was a little extra money, maybe he could buy more Pokémon. His thoughts were cut short when his sister, who also acted as housekeeper, interrupted him and bluntly went over the farm's current finances. When he heard how high the ongoing daily expenses really were, Otani abandoned the idea of buying a batch of new Pokémon. With the present income, there was no way to solve the feeding problem. Things were only marginally better than before. Most of the cost came from securing resources from Otani's 6 main factions. The Super Cube worked, it really did, but it was absurdly expensive to produce. If Otani hadn't built it himself, he never could have afforded the price tag. At first, he'd thought about selling the Super Cube on the open market, but he quickly abandoned the idea. The flawless blocks were already pushing him to his limit. The attention and political pressure that a public sale would draw were more than he could handle alone. He was only able to bear that straw in because the Yulong family was backing him. Without their support, exposing the cubes to the world would be reckless. Then a quieter option occurred to him. A private deal with a top trainer, discreet, direct, and kept off the public records, would avoid the heat a public transaction would bring. The more he thought about it, the better it sounded. If he handled things carefully, selling a few cubes privately would solve his immediate financial problems without blowing up into something he couldn't control. The first step, he decided, was practical. Find trustworthy buyers and begin ferrying the goods to them in small, controlled shipments. If he could arrange a string of private transfers through reliable channels, he could protect the technology, repay debts, and keep the Yulong family, and himself, out of the limelight. Chapter 138, Departure to Sinnoh. When Frosty the milkmaid returned, the farm's Pokémon immediately swarmed her, begging for stories. For 3 days straight, she obliged, spinning increasingly extravagant tales of the adventure team's exploits. The Pokémon listened like a crowd at a show, eyes bright and ears pricked. A few even asked if they could come along, but Frosty apologized. She hadn't packed any gear for them and had to get back home. Not every Pokémon could abandon a comfortable life for the unpredictability of the road, she explained. The stories seemed endless. She never told the same one twice, and each telling grew more colorful than the last. Otani sat among the listeners. The farm could be dull, and he enjoyed hearing something exciting for a change. Frosty had a gift for storytelling. That morning, Dew arrived at the farm riding his Charizard. Otani had mentioned earlier that he intended to sell a small number of supercubes, and Dew had rushed over at once. Having used a supercube himself, he knew how effective they could be. "Otani, whatever you're selling, I'll take it," Dew said as he sank onto the sofa, took a sip of tea, and watched the roomful of enchanted Pokémon. Otani poured himself a glass. "I'm really short on cash lately," he said. "I'll take long-term orders. If you can afford it, I can supply it regularly." "That's perfect. I'll start with a year's supply." "How much per piece?" Dew asked. "We're old friends," Otani replied. "I'll give you a discount, 50 Alliance coins each." "That's surprisingly cheap," Dew said. "I worked it out, about 10 billion Alliance coins for the year. It's still within my budget." Otani blinked. "Didn't you say you weren't one to haggle?" he thought. "You're loaded. 10 billion a year is nothing to sneeze at. How much must your family make?" The resources of those old families were unfathomable. Dew smiled faintly. "Even so, I can't use top-tier resources like this every year. 1 year will be enough for me to break through my current combat limit and reach the next level." Then he added, as if anticipating Otani's next question, And that's all my own savings over the years. Don't think my family paid for it. Watari shot Otani a displeased look. Otani scratched the side of his nose, a little embarrassed. He had indeed assumed the money came from Du's family. Even my family couldn't afford to pay such a high wage, Du protested. Besides, what would people say? Things like strengthening your own Pokémon are supposed to be paid for personally. Otani rubbed his chin and weighed the situation. It was already a strain supporting 6 main team members. If every talented person in the Yulong family came asking the same thing, the family would have been bankrupt long ago. Still, he couldn't refuse a customer so easily. You've emptied my little coffers in one go, he said with a half smile. From now on, I'm moving into your house. You'll have to feed me. All right, no problem. Stay as long as you like, Du replied. Otani was unusually indulgent with his first big client. He let Du rest while he took the money and got to work. With his skill improving, the time required to make a super cube had dropped a lot. It only took him a little longer than producing ordinary blocks. By the end of the afternoon, he'd finished the month's supply Watari needed. Du paid cash on delivery without hesitation. That influx of money lifted Otani out of his immediate financial crisis. I'm going to Sinnoh soon. Do you want to come with me? Otani asked Watari. Watari shrugged. No thanks. Sirona didn't request any support, so it's not easy for me to go over there. All right, I'll go by myself then, Otani said casually. He meant it. After all, a league champion can't just leave his duties whenever he pleases, unless there's an official reason. A few days later, the adventure team had finished their rest and were ready to continue their unfinished journey to Sinnoh. This time, however, Otani was coming along. Mewtwo had finished its previous assignment and returned to type its residence, but Otani brought his main team, including Eevee, and set off with the group. To save travel time, Otani asked Eevee to use its instant teleport ability, and they reached Sinnoh in a single day. They had contacted Sirona ahead of time, so once they arrived, Otani and the adventure team split up and headed for Kamiya Town, where the History Research Institute was located. Otani, over here. Sirona stood at the institute's entrance with a bright smile to greet them. Otani returned the smile and walked up to her. Dagu, why did you come so suddenly? Sirona asked, curious. Otani smiled. I heard you were in trouble, so I came to see if I could help. A soft cough sounded behind them. Ahem, Sirona, why don't you introduce your friend? A kindly-faced woman stepped forward. Grandma, this is Otani from the Kanto region. She's an excellent breeder. Sirona turned to the older woman. This is my grandmother, Dr. Mustard Orchid. She's the director of the Historical Research Institute. Dr. Mustard Orchid appraised Otani with a thoughtful nod. You look respectable, and your manner is good, she said. Otani felt a little awkward under the steady inspection, but offered a polite bow. Hello, Doctor. I'm Otani, a friend of Sirona's. I came to help and to share some information I've gathered. At the mention of information, Dr. Mustard Orchid's expression shifted to businesslike. This is not the place to talk. Come inside. They stepped into the institute. Shelves of books and papers were neatly arranged throughout the rooms. In the reception area, the three of them sat down, and Otani took a moment to collect her thoughts before speaking. In my younger years, I traveled through the Sinnoh region, she began. I explored one of the ruins there. I can't remember exactly where it was anymore. It was too long ago, but I remember what was painted on the murals inside, Otani said, taking a slow sip of tea. Dr. Mustard Orchid and Sirona leaned forward to listen. Otani set the cup down and continued. I don't remember the words, only the pictures. They showed something very much like what Team Galaxy is trying now. 3 artifacts used to open the gun gate, the summoning of Dialga and Palkia, and those 2 legendaries reshaping the world into a new one. Dr. Mustard Orchid's face tightened at that. If that's true, it's bad news, she said. Team Galaxy already has the 3 gods of the lake. They stole the meteorite before, and they must have recovered the red chain as well. Not long ago, the Baidaishi ruins were raided by unknown intruders. The gun key you mentioned probably fell into their hands then. All that's left in my collection is the diamond orb. If they have the other pieces, they could begin their plan to destroy this world and create another. Sirona, by contrast, kept a steadier expression and sounded more hopeful. As long as they don't get the diamond pearl, their plan will be useless. Otani nodded. Exactly. All 3 items are essential. If they miss even one, they can't carry it out. Now we need to beef up the Institute's defenses so the Galaxy team can't exploit any openings. Dr. Mustard sighed and agreed. That's all we can do for now. Chapter 139. Attack. Sinnoh moved fast. The authorities had quietly poured manpower into the Institute of History, a show of force that doubled as a message to Team Galactic. We know what you were planning, and we'll be waiting for you. Chi-Ri stood in a suit, frowning as he read the briefing in his hand. It looks like there are 6 people in Sinnoh sharp enough to have figured out our next move, he said. They learned about us too quickly. Cancel the operation and assemble everyone. We're heading to Shenhe Town. Chi-Ri's original plan had been laid months ago. He intended to enter the Institute of History undercover as a wealthy philanthropist, identify the exact location of the Diamond Orb, and then seize it in one decisive strike with the help of insiders and outside operatives. But thanks to intelligence from Otani, Sinnoh had foreknowledge of just how important the orb was and had reinforced the Institute accordingly. With heavy guards in place, Chi-Ri's optimal plan was no longer viable. His staged donor persona would never survive that level of scrutiny. Chi-Ri had guessed the bribed spies had been caught, and he was right. His cover had been blown. The insider's confession had already given the Alliance a rough sketch of Team Galactic's leadership. None of that mattered to Chi-Ri anymore. Now that his identity was out in the open, it was time to go all out. He called every member of Team Galactic to mobilize. The Sinnoh Alliance learned of the movement almost as quickly and readied itself for a fight. Team Galactic had made no attempt to hide its plans. They were counting on the Alliance not discovering their true objective in time, on the Alliance being thrown into confusion before it could organize a proper response. Outside the Institute of History, Zhenxing stepped forward and lowered his voice. Chief, are you sure we don't need someone to slip in covertly and search for the orb? Chi-Ri gave him a calm, amused look. We have some old friends who will take care of that for us. All we have to do is wait and collect the rewards. Old friends? You mean Team Rocket? When Zhenxing said it, his voice carried a note of admiration. Chi-Ri deserved it. He had already thought of everything. The 2 groups faced each other in front of the Research Institute. Ms. Junsha raised a bullhorn. Chi-Ri, surrender now, and the Alliance may consider a lighter sentence. Chi-Ri only sneered. He gave a dismissive wave and launched the attack. Under his command, Huoxing, Suixing, and Zhenxing led their troops forward. The Alliance answered immediately. Otani moved straight toward Zhenxing. Who dares block my way? Go, Gardevoir, take him down. Zhenxing flicked open a Pokéball and a Gardevoir materialized between them. Otani froze for a moment, recognition flashing across his face. So it was you that was at the farm. That's who started the fire. Zhenxing touched his chin. Oh? You know this Gardevoir? If I'm not mistaken, Larulus is with you as well. Enough talk, Zhenxing said through clenched teeth. I want justice for the Pokémon that died in that fire. Bulbasaur, now! Chi-Ri laughed and mocked them from the front lines. Ha! You're nothing but small-timers, all high-sounding talk and no backbone. I despise people like you. Zhenxing's face hardened with disgust as the 2 sides collided. Gardevoir, predict the future. Vulpecula, green grass field. Strong mind, destruction, death, light. A brutal fight had erupted between Otani and Zhenxing. Otani hesitated. Gardevoir was Ralts's mother, and he couldn't bring himself to strike her. At the same time, he couldn't go after Zhenxing directly. Zhenxing was using Gardevoir as a human shield, and he knew it. Zhenxing obviously noticed Otani's restraint and grew more and more ruthless. Otani's Venusaur was incredibly strong, and it wasn't long before its attacks began to land on Gardevoir. Still, Gardevoir kept getting back on her feet, and Zhenxing's expression went hard. Tsk, you're stubborn, aren't you? Fine, let me show you the power of modern tech. He pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed a button. Gardevoir's normally soft eyes flickered with pain as a black electrical current crawled from a discrete device at the base of her skull, crawling over her entire body. Otani felt it immediately. Gardevoir's life force was spiking unnaturally. It was one of those illegal amplifiers, machines that squeeze out a Pokémon's latent potential and artificially boost their combat effectiveness. Explicitly banned by the League, they were notorious for the damage they could do. The consequences of forcing a Pokemon's power upward like that were easy to imagine and terrifying. "Stop it, you bastard," Otani shouted. Gardevoir glowed with a regal aura. The psychic energy it was using now seemed more than twice as strong. "Gardevoir, concentrate," its trainer jeered. "Vulpecula, hold on," Otani barked. At the same moment, Gardevoir's future sight hit. Their defenses shattered in an instant. The two special attacks connected with Vulpecula at once. Venusaur screamed as the blows landed. "Vulpecula!" Otani glanced at his Pokémon. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," the Venusaur answered hoarsely. Relief washed over Otani. They had to finish this quickly. If they hesitated, Gardevoir would overwhelm them. "Vulpecula, use Giant Vine Whip," Venusaur lashed out, swinging both Vine Whips. Natural energy coalesced along them, transforming the vines into two enormous, hammer-like whips. They crashed toward Genshin, who barely dodged. The whips slammed into the ground, sending a violent tremor through the battlefield and drawing everyone's attention. Flustered, Genshin teleported away to avoid the follow-up. "Damn, what kind of move was that?" he muttered. "Why is it so powerful?" Where the vines struck, the ground split open into a yawning pit. Each hit seemed to gain speed from its own momentum, the whip moving so fast it left after-images in the air. Even with Gardevoir teleporting away in an instant, Genshin was only getting more and more outmatched. He couldn't mount a proper defense. Before he could steady himself, another strike from Bulbasaur, now massive and brutal, landed. Some members of the Galaxy team tried to intervene, but the whip swept them up and sent them flying. They disappeared into the dust. Their fate was unknown. Otani's face went cold with anger. He was done holding back. When Genshin stumbled, Otani hissed, "Now." He didn't need to say more. Venusaur moved as if reading his mind. The Vine Whip arced toward Genshin, and instinctively he ordered Gardevoir to take the blow. Exactly as Otani had counted on, the vine didn't just strike, it coiled. It wrapped around Gardevoir, dragged her free despite her struggles, and smashed the device on her head in a single brutal motion. Gardevoir collapsed to the ground. Otani knew that a delicate device like that couldn't be torn apart on a whim. Doing so could have serious consequences. He didn't care. If he kept hesitating, Gardevoir wouldn't last. He set the instrument aside and administered emergency treatment, stabilizing her vital signs. "You're lucky this time," he muttered. Genshin was already moving to flee, and the leader, who had been trading blows with Sharona, began to fall back. Team Rocket's operation had succeeded. They were preparing to collect the payoff. On Chiri's command, they started to withdraw. Something about that unsettled Otani. He raced back to the research institute and found the secret room's door standing open. The precious orb that had been inside was gone. "Damn it, Ibrahimovic, track who took the orb," Otani ordered. Ibrahimovic's eyes flared blue. He locked onto a target, and in an instant teleported them both away, hot on the thief's trail. Chapter 140. The Orb Was Stolen. Eevee and Otani materialized in the middle of a dim forest clearing. A handful of familiar figures stopped them cold. Musashi, Meowth, and Kojiro were pinned down, battered and breathless, surrounded by a swarm of Zubats that swooped and jabbed at them. Nearby, members of Team Galaxy hemmed them in, weapons leveled. Meowth clutched a glowing orb to his chest and snarled, "If you come any closer, I'll smash it." The threat made the Galaxy operatives hesitate. No one wanted the orb destroyed. Otani's sudden arrival shattered the standoff. He stepped forward, and the tension tilted instantly. Kojiro started to blurt something out, but Musashi slapped a hand over his mouth and hissed, "Not a word. Your cover's still active. You'll get us all killed." Kojiro fell silent and visibly pulled himself together, avoiding meeting the gaze of the newcomer. "All right, fine," he muttered. Across the clearing, Hao Xing, clearly the Galaxy Field commander, studied Otani with a hard, appraising look. "Interesting," he said. "I'll hold him. The rest of you, go for the orb. Dongxi Miao, cover me." Otani didn't waste time on words. "We can't linger. More Galaxy forces will be on us fast. Ibrahimovic, bring the orb here now." Eevee's eyes glinted. The little Pokemon's psychic power flared to life. A hush fell as tendrils of influence washed over those nearby. Team Galaxy's soldiers froze mid-movement, their expressions slackening as Eevee silently bent their wills. Musashi and Kojiro tensed, but the psychic pressure kept them from interfering. With everyone's reactions dulled, Otani moved like lightning. He swept between the immobilized ranks and plucked the orb from Meowth's grip as if it were weightless. Meowth flailed and cursed, but he couldn't move. In the space of a breath, Otani had the orb. Eevee's control held long enough for them to retreat, and when it finally released, the forest erupted into shouts and the frantic flapping of Zubats, but the thieves were already gone. They were barely a few steps away when a braided scarlet chain shot down from the sky and wrapped itself around Ibrahimovic and Hai Chaomeng at once. The chain sparked with red electricity. The jolt ran through Otani, and he let out a desperate cry. The surge of energy overwhelmed Eevee, triggering a sudden violent change. Eevee shifted and pulsed into its black Mewtwo form. "Otani?" Hai Chaomeng snarled, bloodshot eyes fixed on the now unconscious Otani. He strained against the bindings, summoning every ounce of strength to snap the chain. "So this is where you are. I've been looking for you a long time, 001. A cold voice came from the tree line. Chiri stepped out from among the trees and planted himself in front of Hai Chaomeng. "You bastard!" He spat. "I'm going to kill you." Black Mewtwo erupted, black and red energy flaring wildly around him. He slammed into the shackles again and again, but the chains held fast, humming with a resistant force that swallowed the attacks. "Don't waste your power," Chiri said calmly. "These bindings were made specifically for the twin dragons of time and space. Maybe it's overkill for you, but better safe than sorry. We'll take them both back together." With that, Chiri turned as if to walk away. A shadow cut across the clearing. Sirona rode in on a Garchomp, powerful and fast, and brought the creature to a stop nearby. She clicked her tongue. "You're always so troublesome. Fine. Go on ahead and take the orb back." Chiri started toward her, but Sirona's eyes narrowed. She aimed a cold look at Hai Chaomeng and Ibrahimovic. "Stop! If you take another step, I'll kill him." The Dongshi cat at Huoxing's side bared its claws and dug them into Dagu's neck. It pressed down so hard that dark blood welled up through the fur. "Otani!" Sirona cried. Chiri looked displeased, but he didn't argue with Huoxing. The Galaxy team began to fall back slowly. Then a plume of smoke erupted from the clearing. Sirona barked an order for Garchomp to disperse it, but by the time the small, thinned, Team Galaxy had already vanished. Sinnoh personnel rushed onto the scene. Dr. Mustard Orchid hurried over to Sirona and asked, "What happened?" "Dagu was taken," Sirona said, voice tight. Dr. Mustard Orchid's face went pale. "This is bad." Sirona pulled out her phone and called Du at once. At the farm, Du was sprawled on the sofa, half asleep. His phone rang, and he snatched it up. "What? I'm on my way," he said, and without another word, he leapt onto Charizard's back, and they blasted off towards Sinnoh. "Otani, you're impossible," Watari muttered through clenched teeth. On the summit of Chungwan Mountain, the Galaxy team had reached their destination without incident. Otani was thrown to the ground without mercy. The shock of the impact dragged him out of unconsciousness, pain flaring through his body, and he realized he was bound, lying on the earth like a discarded worm. "Chiri, you have no sense of honor," he thought bitterly. "A sneak attack. I was careless and couldn't dodge. I failed to help, and now I'm nothing but dead weight." He forced himself to breathe slowly, to steady his racing heart, and took in his surroundings. Members of the Galaxy team were working non-stop, moving with cold efficiency. No one paid him any heed. Even if they noticed him, they would ignore him. They had a plan to finish. "Ha! Everything is collected. Next, we create a new world. Don't forget the rewards you promised me," Pluto crowed, laughing loud and bright. Chiri smiled at the words, but there was a hard edge of contempt in his eyes. "Of course." Pluto opened a small box, the case that held the gun key. The key rose from the velvet lining as if by its own will, floated slowly through the air, and glided toward the weapon's hatch. It fitted perfectly against the lock. The heavy door ground open. Outside, the red sun crested the horizon like a promise. With that light came the declaration: a new world was about to be born. At the same time, the Sinnoh Alliance reached Mount Crown. Their forces gathered at the foot of the mountain, every member assembled and waiting for orders, a tense, polished contrast to the chaos on the other side. Dew had fallen from the sky, racing here at full speed regardless of the cost. Ice crystals still clung to his hair. What's the situation? He demanded. He didn't wait to check himself. When a staff member handed him a cup of hot water, he drained it in one go and immediately felt steadier. He gave the attendant a grateful look. Not good, the woman, Sharona, replied. Chiri has gathered all the ritual pieces and gone into Tianguan Mountain. I think they've already started. No sooner had she finished than a beam of energy shot up from the peak of Tianguan Mountain. Chiri stood atop a stone pillar, while members of the Galaxy team set the Vajra Orb and the White Jade Soul into the pillar's grooves. The three lake gods were bound in red chains, forced to pour their power into the Vajra Orb and the White Jade Soul. Hands on, Chiri ordered. At his command, the Galaxy team members by Pluto activated devices that sent out two beams of light. The beams carved circular rifts in the air. Energy from the orbs swirled and gathered before those openings. Slowly, the figures of Dialga and Palkia began to solidify and emerge. Elsewhere, Otani lay bound to the floor. A figure in a Team Galactic uniform worked quickly and quietly at his ropes. Who are you? Otani asked. Interpol, the man said. I've been undercover in Team Galactic. Sorry, there were too many of them earlier, so I couldn't get to you. Call me Handsome if you like. He peeled off the disguise and revealed his face. For a moment, Otani just stared, then scrambled to his feet. Your companion's being held in the dungeon, Otani said. We'll get them out. Handsome led the way, moving through the corridors with practiced stealth. They found the prisoner where Otani had expected, Black Mewtwo, chained to the wall, every limb bound tight. Black Mewtwo, Otani called, rushing forward. Black Mewtwo read and opened his eyes. I'm glad it's you, Otani, he said slowly, relief in his voice. Otani worked the restraints free. Once the bonds were removed, Black Mewtwo rubbed his wrists and rose. Good, he said. Now we settle this. At the spear pillar, Dialga and Palkia had appeared, only to be shackled by chains that seemed designed to drain even gods of their power. Chiri stood nearby, giving a cold order. Fight! Under Chiri's command, time and space turned against each other. Dialga and Palkia attacked in a collision of temporal and spatial force. The energies gathered above Sinnoh, a blinding convergence that spread outward in waves. The impact rolled over everything. Otani and the man who'd called himself Handsome felt the ground and the air buckle as if the road before them stretched on forever, the world itself losing its bearings. No one in the area realized that time itself was beginning to loop and space was slowly warping. On the mountainside, Dr. Yamanashi and Dr. Mustard Orchid hunched over their instruments, watching the readings climb. The entire interior of Mount Tianguan has been distorted in both time and space, Dr. Yamanashi said, his face tight with worry. Anyone who goes in will keep replaying what happened there before. It's impossible to reach the spear pillar at the summit, and the distortion is spreading. At this rate, it will soon cover the whole Sinnoh region. Sharona and Du moved forward cautiously. Through the haze in the entrance, they saw Otani and the handsome young man caught in the loop, repeating the same few actions over and over like a stuck slideshow. There was nothing they could do from where they stood. All they could do was watch and wait. Then suddenly, a loose stone clattered from the wall and a small head poked out from the gap. Meow? A loose stone slid from the wall and a small pink head popped out of the gap. Meow, it squeaked. Sharona stared at the familiar little face. Menghuan, she breathed. Menghuan, why are you here? Du called, stepping forward, panic in his voice. We need your help. Come see what's happening to Otani. Menghuan blinked her huge, innocent eyes, then turned her attention to Otani. He was stuck in a loop, repeating the same motion over and over. The sight amused her. She floated up, covered her mouth with a paw, and giggled as she circled him. Someone jostled her. She let out a surprised chirp. Mama, she squealed, and a passerby snapped. Don't block the way. This is odd. Why are you here, Menghuan? Another voice asked. Handsome guy, is something wrong? Otani glanced briefly at the handsome man, then fell back into the repetition. Menghuan laughed again, clearly entertained. Frosty the Fairy and the others wriggled out through the hole in the wall behind her. When Celebi saw how Otani was trapped in that strange, repeating state, he wasted no time. He rushed forward and pulled both Otani and the handsome man clear of the space-time disturbance, dragging them beyond its reach. Otani snapped back to his usual self and lightly tapped Menghuan on the head. Meow? Mengwan winced and looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. The sight immediately wiped the anger from Otani's face. He reached out, rubbed the spot where he'd tapped her, and apologized. Sorry. Are you okay, Mengwan? Sirona hurried over. Everyone all right? I'm fine, Otani said, then glanced at the handsome young man nearby. How about you? The handsome man frowned. I'm okay, but we've got a bigger problem. There's space-time energy surrounding the spear pillar. If that field is active, we can't get close. Otani's eyes went to the Frost Fairy, who was inspecting the area as if thinking. Frost Fairy, you tunneled in here, didn't you? Mama, the Frost Fairy announced proudly, lifting her chin and nodding. Sirona's face lit up as she understood, and Du reacted the same way. That could be our chance, Duhei said. But we should contact Dr. Mustard Orchid first. Sirona pulled out her phone and called. After a few moments, she listened intently, then said, I see. Then we still have a chance. Dr. Mustard Orchid says she can set up a temporary stabilizer at the tunnel exit to suppress the space-time field long enough for us to get through. She'll guide us on the setup. We need to move quickly. Yamanashi and I had come up with a theory about why the red sun was immune to the space-time energy. There was probably a local shield formed around the chain. If we could tunnel in from beneath the spear pillar, we'd have a chance to catch them off guard. If that's the case, we have to move now, the handsome man said, voice tight. The space-time energy is spreading fast. Otani and the others exchanged looks and nodded. Frost Milk Fairy tried to go with them, but Otani stopped him. Get out of here with the adventuring team, he ordered. Mew and Celebi aren't fighters. They don't stand a chance against God Galga and Palkia. Onyx, please, Watari called. Onyx answered with a solemn nod, and following Watari's directions, began to bore a huge tunnel into the pillar. Otani and his group scrambled into the freshly dug shaft and disappeared. For a moment it seemed the others had already slipped through a gap in the wall and were leaving, but then they turned back and a small voice shouted, Mama! There was no way the adventuring team was going to miss a grand adventure like this. Frost Milk Fairy didn't hesitate. He dove straight into the cave after Otani. Mew and Celebi followed him without a second thought. The little blue jay looked helpless, but it spread its wings and flew into the cave, finally settling on the muzzle of a gun fixed to a nearby pillar. Chiri strained against the chains, fighting to control them. The burden was crushing. Blood trickled from all 7 orifices of his body. Almost there, he rasped. Give me our power. Create a new galaxy, a new world. As he finished, Dialga and Palkia poured even more energy into him. A shimmering amplification rolled out from the 2 legendary beings. Chief, we succeeded, someone breathed. The old world is about to end, the new world. Mars watched Chiri's back with sharp anticipation. Pluto's face was the same, hungry, expectant. Once they stepped into that new world, every promise the Galaxy team had been dangled would be paid in full. That's it! Red Sun! Chiri shouted. The ruined ground answered. The earth beneath the ruins swelled and split open. A colossal serpent of rock erupted from the soil, coiling and roaring as it broke free. One by one, Otani and his allies emerged onto the battlefield behind it. It's truly terrifying, Zhenxing said coldly, watching them advance. The clash was about to begin, but the odds were grim. Otani's side held the advantage. 2 champions, Otani himself, a counterfeit champion in power, and Interpol's handsome ace standing with them. Faced with that force, the Galaxy team shattered. Their strength collapsed, and one by one they lost the ability to fight. They didn't look nervous at all. Chiri's plan had already been set in motion, and nobody could stop it now. All we have to do is cut the red chain. Right? Landshark, Dragonclaw, Sharona barked the order. Landshark surged forward and struck. The red chain snapped with a blinding crack. Chiri was blasted backward by the force and coughed blood. Sirona, stop! Otani shouted, lunging toward her, but it was too late. A wild laugh escaped Chiri even as blood trailed from his mouth. Heh! Do you really think breaking the chains will keep Dialga and Palkia from fighting? Ridiculous. Without my control, they'll only go even more feral. His face streaked with blood. Chiri didn't seem to care. As Dialga and Palkia's battle detonated through time and space, its ferocity magnified without the chains to damp it. Waves of temporal energy rolled outward, larger and more violent than before. The chains had acted as a shield. Now, with them gone, everyone was directly exposed. The air itself bent and shredded. People and Pokémon swayed under the assault, unable to resist. A torrent of distressed cries rose above the chaos. A frantic meow here, a frightened trill there, a child calling, "Mama!" Everywhere the battle's pressure pressed on lungs and hearts. Then, through the cacophony, the adventure team made their move. Celebi and Mew combined their power, weaving a shimmering barrier that threw itself between the group and the rippling void. The field flared, absorbing and redirecting the worst of the time-space shock. Those inside the dome felt the pressure ease from their bodies as the worst of the temporal energy washed past them. Frost Milk Fairy straightened, chest puffing with pride, and announced, "See, I told you they wouldn't abandon me." The barrier held, for now, fending off the catastrophic backlash of the two titans' clash. The strange thing was that Chiri didn't seem affected at all. He stood transfixed, watching the twin dragons of time and space, Dialga and Palkia, with a quiet fascination as their battle grew more frantic. As the clash intensified, a rift to a chaotic world began to tear open nearby. Darkness poured out of it so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Two red eyes blinked in that blackness, and then a vast, savage silhouette rose slowly from the void. Dialga and Palkia instantly sensed the unfamiliar presence and launched themselves at the shadow. It evaded a time roar and a warp slash with effortless speed. Then from the darkness, two spheres of black energy streaked forward and struck the chains that bound the twin dragons. The restraints shattered. Dialga and Palkia snapped back to full power. The dragons regarded the shadow with a long, searching look, then spread their wings and flew off, entirely uninterested in Chiri and the others. The shadow, however, continued to advance toward Chiri. He watched it approach, without flinching. There was no fear on his face. "Leader!" Zhenxing cried out, panic in his voice, but none of them dared step forward. Seizing the distraction, Hades slipped away from the ruins unnoticed. "This guy Chiri is really disappointing," someone snapped. Otani recognized the shadow at once. Giratina, ruler of the distortion world, an entity whose power is second only to Arceus, the creator. Giratina's silhouette fell over Akari and seemed to swallow the red sun in a single gulp. The members of Team Galaxy watched in stunned disbelief. Mars and Jupiter covered their mouths in shock. Only Zhenxing stayed calm. He tossed a smoke bomb and slipped away with the other two, convinced their leader had already arrived in the new world.